In the presence of a quorum, I will now call the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:31 on January 17th, and we will start off with a roll call. We'll go. Craig.
Craig's present.
Irv.
Irv is present.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Beth's present.
Peter.
Peter present.
Margaret.
Margaret present.
Stephen.
Hi.
Hey, how are you? Allison.
Allison present.
And Ben present. That makes 8 of us minus 1 tonight. And we can start with the approval of minutes from, I guess we'll start with November 29th. Did everybody have a chance to go over all of the minutes in general? Got a thumbs up. Is that a no? I see a no. So did everyone get to go over the November 29th minutes at least? No thumbs. Did anyone have any edits or anything to make or additions? Does anyone feel confident enough to make a motion here?
I'll move to approve the November 29th minutes.
All right. Moved by Craig. I'll go ahead and second. And we'll take a roll call vote sans a discussion. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Beth's aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
And Ben, aye. Passes unanimously. And we will move to the December 20th meeting minutes. Does anybody have any additions, edits, etc.?
I'll move to approve the December 20 minutes.
Moved by Craig. And I will second. We'll take a roll call vote on that. Go reverse order here. Allison?
Allison, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Beth's aye.
Margaret?
Margaret abstain.
Peter?
Peter abstain.
And Ben, aye. So 6 ayes, 2 abstentions, and 1 absent. We will move to Four Towns meeting from December 17th. Anybody have any additions, edits, etc.? Looking like no. So somebody want to make a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of December 17th, 2022.
Second.
Moved by Peter, seconded by Margaret. We'll take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Beth's aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
And Ben abstain. Passes 7 ayes, 1 abstention, and 1 not present. So now we can move to public comments. Do you want to share that, Mike, or?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll move to the superintendent's update.
Okay. I will be brief. So last week, and you'll hear about this from Principal Steve likely, but we've gotten back in the habit of doing safety drills with staff and at the high school level in conversations that the leadership team there had with students as well as faculty. There was a strong interest to have a safety drill that involves students. It's a little different than when the students are younger in terms of both their capacity to be involved in those drills, but also their ability to be, critical stakeholders in keeping schools safe. And so this was a pretty low stakes one. It wasn't anything that was like a real significant simulation. Everyone knew it was happening. It wasn't anything that I think, according to Principal Steek, caused incredible amounts of stress. But we want to build the motor memory of what to do if there really was a safety situation at the school. We've had at least one, actually two this year, the Amherst College thing, as well as the fire incident that we've talked about here. And so, I thank our partners at the police department for working with us, and also how to, developmentally right size what we want our students to be involved with drills. And so that was on the 12th, so last week. The second thing I want to share is for those of you who've been in the district or been connected district for a while, many of you may remember Brian Unclestone, longtime employee, worked in the IS department, who passed away about a year ago. There's an event this Saturday, January 21st from 2 to 3:30 in the high school auditorium that it's staff members who worked with Brian, as well as Brian's son, who are going to get involved, and there'll be plaques that'll be unveiled, but also just to tell stories about Brian. As someone who worked directly with Brian for some time, I appreciate staff, especially those who were involved in AV, John Bechtold's involved, and other folks who recognized how Brian could solve a problem in a pinch, no matter what the time of day of the week. He made a lot of performances happen at our school. He's also a very talented musician himself. So appreciate staff who are stepping forward to do this 1 year memorial at a time, compared to a year ago, where we're able to do a little more in terms of having large groups together and all that. So be appreciative of that. On Friday, we had a very moving Martin Luther King Day assembly at the middle school. So thank you to the staff members who organized that event. It's the end of the semester. So we have half days the next 2 days. Friday's teacher work day, and then Monday's a new semester. So lots of changes in classes, and we'll make sure that our staff members have ample opportunity to make those connections as some classes are continuing, but particularly at the high school where most classes are changing at the semester mark. But just it's a sign that we're about halfway through the year, so exciting sign. And I overheard a number of middle school students today excited about their electives changing and what that's going to look like come next week. They're really curious what the date is and why at the high school, what does finals mean, and why is it not like that at the middle school? Not that they were advocating for final exams, but it was interesting dialogue I had in the hallways today at the middle school. And last thing I have is MPAC, our group that works much like CPAC with special ed. MPAC works with ELL, English language learner families, tomorrow night, 7:30 on Zoom. So if anyone's interested in attending the meeting, everyone is welcome. And that is my rather brief update for this evening.
Perfect. Any questions or comments for Mike regarding the update? Allison, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for the reminder about the end of the semester. And I have a question regarding changes to the schedule. Can you talk a little bit about what changes are happening at the high school going into the next semester with the plus period, I think is what's changing?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, the Principal Sadiq may talk about that when he talks about safety, because it is connected in some ways, but really shifting the advisory to more of a choice block, so that students are more engaged in that time and find it more useful. There's a lot of surveys done for staff and students who are trying to make the best sense of that advisory time. That time is really dedicated to students wanting to be connecting with staff members and students, and our current model, the feedback wasn't really achieving that end. So the way faculty meetings work, they have small groups that are working groups, and one of them was focused on this issue. So a group of faculty members gathered interest from staff members and trying to make connections more through areas of interest or affinity, as opposed to sort of randomly by your last name, more or less. So we're excited about that change, and we'll assess whether it's achieving the end that we had, but it really is connected to safety, not so much physical safety, but it's really, that time is really critical in terms of making the connections. And, lots of evidence that at schools who students say, if I'm having a problem, there's one adult I can go to and trust that makes it a safer environment. And we're looking at it through, again, a little more of an affinity lens than a sort of randomized lens as to where people end up in advisories. So we're looking forward to trying this out and seeing how it works, and appreciate the ingenuity of our staff at the high school and flexibility to try something really different than what we've tried before, all in the same end.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? All right. So we'll move to the chair's update, which is super brief. I don't have one. And we'll take any school committee announcements, if any. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I don't know if we asked for public comment from people that attending the meeting here. If we didn't, maybe we could open up public comment again, just in case somebody is here to do that.
Fair enough. We did not. So if there's anyone present who would like to make a public comment, you can do so by raising your hand and we will acknowledge you. Not seeing any hands go up. So I'll move on to school committee and Allison.
Oh, I thought. Sorry, I think I jumped the gun. Were you moving on to school committee announcements?
You must be psychic. Yep, absolutely.
Well, I have an announcement. The negotiation subcommittee, our next meeting is February 3rd. Well, the next meeting of the subcommittee is February 1st. The next mediation session is February 3rd, and I believe both of those are posted. That was the soonest that all the groups could get together. So that's our next meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Are there any other school committee announcements? All right, so then we'll move into new and continuing business and start with the Human, pardon me, human resources report. Were you setting that up, Mike? Or
I was. So, thank you. And so, before I share their slides, and just want to introduce that our team, our human resources team, works in multiple domains. They work obviously in human resources, but they also work in the area of diversity and equity. And so, it's a broad approach that we've taken, and I think we've realized significant results. And it's really thanks to the work of the four people you'll hear from in a little bit. But this is our annual update just to share where we are with our data, our work. I think this year we went back a little bit in time, so there's a little bit of historical context as well that influences us today, even for groups that aren't currently kind of existing. We thought it was important to go back and, think back to how our systems have evolved. So I know I feel very fortunate to have this group of folks with us and tonight, but also that I get to work with every day because they really, we're a people business, right? Like we're schools, and if we don't get the right people, our business doesn't work very well. And we really have. You think about this fall when there was a nice article on Mass Live about our MCAS scores, and you might say, oh yeah, that's focused on academics, but we're only as good as the individuals we have working with kids, and these folks have done a great job, in my opinion, of getting the right people into the right positions to be successful in our districts. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Cunningham, or Doreen. We go by first name basis, I think, these days at school committee. So I'll just say Doreen, and she can introduce her team while I'm bringing up the slides.
Great. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. And I know that you mentioned that our department has done this great job, but we couldn't do it without the support of the school committee and without the support of you and the administrators and even the rest of the staff in our district, because it's all of us collectively that make our district the best district that it is, right? Or the great district that it is. So without further ado, the next slide will tell you who we have here on the meeting with us. So as Mike mentioned, I am Doreen Cunningham. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Diversity, Equity, and Human Resources. And with me, the next person, Damani, if you could just say hi.
Good evening, Damani Gordon, Diversity Equity Specialist.
Jen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Ortiz, the Human Resources Administrator.
And Carol.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Newman Rose, and I'm the assistant to the assistant superintendent, or the HR generalist, so to speak.
Right. And so all the other times that you've seen Carol's name, you've always seen her just as the assistant to the assistant superintendent. But because she does so much, we've added to her title as the HR generalist. So thank you, Carol, for doing all that you do. Okay, next slide. So for tonight, as Mike mentioned, we typically would just share our numbers to say, our charge when we started in 2017 was to increase the diversity until it matches the student diversity. But tonight, we're not going to really get into that. We're not going to touch on the numbers as deeply as we do or did in previous presentations. We figured tonight that since there's so many new people on the committee, that it would be great to just go back to say why we changed our hiring practices. Because I'm sure that you've heard, oh, the practices changed and, it's not how it used to be. And we just want to go back to the basics to say, this is what it was. This is why change was needed. This is how change took place. And these are the results of what we've been doing. Okay. So with that, we're going to talk about all of those things. And then there were additional questions from different groups that asked, well, what are you doing to promote people within the organization? How are staff helped to take care of themselves? And what kind of PDs do you offer? Who do you partner with? And so there's so many different questions that's been asked of you and us. So we thought, tonight would be a great time for us to share some information. Next slide, please. So just going back to where we were. We, back in 2017-18, when we first started our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Human Resources, we even changed the name just to show what we were doing. We had some searches that had taken place that didn't go as well as we had anticipated it would go. And so it was, okay, what can we do differently? Or why didn't we get the results we were looking for? Or how can the district make things better? So what we did was we pulled together what was called at the time the Search Process Review Committee. And through that Search Process Review Committee, their charge was a one-time charge. And their charge was basically to review what the district was doing as far as interviewing and hiring and such, and the district's way of getting people into the district, right? And make recommendations on how we can do things better. That was the one time charge. And so we sent out an email soliciting um, members from the community, members across the district, from all bargaining units. So parents, guardians, our then CPAC president, so many people reached out and said, we'd like to join. We'd like to give input on what the district can do better. And that was back in 2017-18. So the revision took place then. The group did their charge. They gave an outline as to what a great process could possibly be. And then from there, we created the process as it is now. Mike, please. So when I mentioned the committee members, as you see, we had people like Lamika McGee, who's currently the president of the APEA. She was involved in the process. We had Paul Wiley, a very well respected community member, and he was involved, as well as many others in the community. And as I mentioned, Nancy Stewart, who at this time, or at that time, she was the president of CPAC, and many others, teachers, food service workers, just across all units, as mentioned before. They all came together, joined their voices, spent many hours just saying, okay, how can we do things differently and better? As we know, from our previous numbers, the district, as well as Massachusetts at the time, was predominantly white. The statistics for the Commonwealth is that 92% of the teaching staff are white and mostly female. So, with the charge of making a change, this committee came up with what is currently the process. So, I think the next slide. Okay. When they reviewed what we were doing across the district, they found that there was no consistency. So, they felt that what one group was doing at, let's say, Crocker Farm, as far as the interview and the hiring process, was different from what they probably did at Wildwood or at the middle school or at the high school. So they thought, as a district, if we could come up with a consistent practice across all the schools, then it would be, everyone would benefit. And if we could train every individual who would be joining their voices and interviewing and helping to do some outreach, they thought it would be a great thing to do. So, as mentioned, they came back with this feedback and said, you know what? These are what our concerns are. How can we make changes? And what we brought to you today is what the changes are. So, with the next slide, I believe it is, Carol would be able to share some of the adjustments that were made to our hiring and our hiring practices.
Okay, so with this new process, there are two committees. We have the screening committee and we have the interview committee. Now, persons who serve on the screening committee do not serve on the interview committee. One committee will screen resumes and choose qualified candidates to interview. And before these committee members are given these resumes, information that can easily identify an applicant's like ethnicity, etc., is removed from the resume. So that kind of information, name and so on, is removed. The resumes will not be shared. They're not shared with the interview committee prior to these interviews. And so licensed diverse candidates are offered an opportunity to interview. Um, Candidates are also given a performance task, and those persons who wish to be on the committees, on the various committees, they have to go do ongoing training. One thing to note is that HR does not lead any of the hiring committees. Once interviews are completed, the principal or the administrator recommends the candidate for the position, and the superintendent is the one who makes the final decision. Thanks, Doreen.
Damani?
Yes, and these are our current results. We broke it down by race and ethnicity. As a result of our reformed hiring practice, as well as other active recruiting and hiring practices that we administered during this time. So as you can see from the 2016-2017 school year until the most recent 21-22 school year, significant changes in terms of the diversification of our staff, which we have seen great results.
Now, if you want it broken down as to year by year, you can always go on the DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed website, and look under school profiles, and it'll give you the year by year as far as how we have increased. And in some years we have decreased in certain categories, but we are on a good trend as far as diversifying the staff. Next slide, please. Jen?
And so this is basically just reiterating what Carol mentioned before, and I think it's important to highlight this fact. And it's that while a staff member from the HR department, myself, Damani, Carol, or Doreen, may sit on a hiring committee and may form part of the team, HR doesn't make any of the hiring decisions. Ultimately, it's the principal's decision to recommend who they will recommend to the superintendent for the final approval for hire. And that's just based on Mass General Law. So when someone is hired in a building or a decision is made to move a candidate forward, it's based on, in our district anyways, the principal received the feedback from the interview committee. And then from there, based on that, they will make the recommendation to the superintendent. And all of our professional staff meet with our superintendent before a hiring decision is made for the superintendent's final approval on that hire. And I just think it's important to denote that because there may be a misconception that HR does all of the hiring and all of the firing. And while that is, we do participate in helping hire and onboard candidates or individuals into our district, ultimately the decision falls within the purview of the superintendent, and that's how the hiring decision is made. And so we just wanted to make sure that that information was out there and that people understood really the role of HR when it comes to hiring educators in our district.
We also put the Mass General Law from which this information can be found. Next slide, please.
And on that note, when it comes to professional teacher status also, because we understand that there may be questions around how PTS, we call it PTS, professional teacher status, is earned in a district. And according to Mass General Law, an educator will earn professional teacher status if they've worked for 3 full consecutive years in a school district and are licensed as of day 1 in the subject area that they're teaching. However, the superintendent may also award PTS to an educator if they've worked for at least 1 year in the district and are licensed, of course, in their subject area. So that was another question that we had as to how is professional teacher status earned and who's granted professional teacher status. And so if a teacher has worked for less than a year and the principal recommends them for PTS to the superintendent, then the superintendent, takes in that recommendation and from there decides if that teacher will be awarded PTS prior to completing the full 3 years in the district.
And just to clarify though, they had to have received PTS in a previous district for that 1 year exception to take place.
Right.
Okay, Mike, next slide.
And so continuing on what the role of HR is and what we do in the ways in which we try to recruit and retain, which is a really big part of what we do in our department. Going back to our hiring practices, you know, another change that we did is that we didn't necessarily wait for candidates to come in and apply or show interest in our district, but we kind of reversed that, where we would do reverse searches on our platform, the platform that we use to find candidates, and look for licensed teachers in areas that we're trying to hire for, and actually reach out to them individually and see if they would have interest in or show any interest in interviewing for any of our open positions. So it was really a very proactive outreach that we began to do back in 2017 because the pool wasn't really that diverse or really wasn't that big. And so there was a lot of growing concern as to if our pools aren't growing and people aren't showing interest, how are we going to hire for these positions? And it was like, okay, well, let's have a targeted approach as to how we're going to do that. Let's do a reverse search if we're looking for a candidate in a certain subject area and reach out to them. And let's do the personal outreach ourselves. And actually, Doreen can attest to this. We've been very successful in finding very highly qualified candidates who expressed that interest in our district and came and interviewed for us and came into our district. So that was a different approach. Rather than just sitting and waiting for people to come to us, we were actually going out to them to seek them out. And then when it comes to retention, we have a very big pull in that, or push in that. We do a lot of training, right? We have our PD days that we're very proud of in November and in March, particularly in November, where we focus a lot of our PD around how we're treating one another, right? And building a positive culture in our school buildings, and how we can make, you know, teachers and educators and staff just all around, not just the teachers, but all staff in the buildings feel welcome, feel valued and appreciated in our district, and how we can do that as peers, right? So it's not necessarily always top down, rather than how are you treating each other in your buildings? What is the dynamic? And we've surveyed a lot of our staff about things that they feel could be better in their buildings or could be better with the culture in their buildings. And then we try to develop trainings based on that and try to give that information back out to our staff members so that we can keep the really great talent and the really great staff that we have and build a better culture in our building. So that's something that we work really hard towards. And it's one of the ways in which we try to retain our staff as well.
Okay, and next we have our Grow Your Own program, more specifically called the Amherst Futures. We are part of a coalition called the Paradigm Shift, which consists of other school districts such as Holyoke and Springfield, colleges, unions and workforce agencies. And the goal is to bring more teachers of color into the districts by way of supporting teachers of color on waiver or bringing paraeducators through a program to complete their get their licenses for their teaching licenses. So from this program that we started a few years ago, so far we've had 22 paraeducators that have moved into teaching roles as well as admin roles. And this partnership is Amherst Future specifically with Mount Holyoke College, and for that partnership, a paraeducator of color, it creates a pathway to get their teaching and certification. And there's a lot of supports there in terms of a heavy discount for Mount Holyoke College courses, as well as contribution from the district. There's MTEL prep courses, mentoring, and a lot of supports around that program. And like I said, we 22 paraeducators so far have moved into teachers roles from that program and admin roles. And we are also currently working on other partnerships as well for our paraeducators that do not have a bachelor degree or might have an associate's degree or just a few credits or just wanting to start and get into get their education in terms of being a teacher. So we are going to be collaborating with Elms College as well through their program, and they have a great program in terms of geared towards paraeducators and adults that work. So we're going to have our first information session next month that's really exciting, and also working on a partnership with University Without Walls, which also caters to adults, working adults who are looking to get a degree in education and other things. So those are two other partnerships that we are moving full steam ahead with as well. And this Amherst Futures program has been solidified for the last couple of years.
Okay, so Jen had shared a little bit about Professional Development Day. Um, this was started in the 2017-2018 school year, and it's usually held on election day in November. And so all categories of staff participate in a half day of professional development with emphasis on race and understanding how systematic racism and unconscious bias affects the environment, and how, as a district, we can support our colleagues, our students, our families, and the wider community. Now, the morning usually starts off with a keynote speaker and a question and answer session, and that's followed by various presentations where staff are given an opportunity to work in groups. This year, the keynote speaker also ran a workshop on centering humanity in our work with youth.
Carol, you're muted.
Oh, so sorry. So sorry about that. Okay. So, like Jen shared a little bit about professional development. And so the district's professional development started in 2017, 2018. And so on election day in November of each year, all categories of staff participate in a half day of professional development with an emphasis on race and understanding how systematic racism and unconscious bias affects our environment, and how, as a district, we can support our colleagues, our students, our families, and the wider community. So the morning usually starts off with a keynote speaker and a question and answer session, followed by various presentations where staff are given an opportunity to work in groups. This year, our keynote speaker also ran a workshop on centering humanity in our work with youth. Other workshops included gender inclusive classrooms, strategies that build community, is it bullying, neurodiversity, and autism acceptance, and that was a panel discussion, supporting learners' well-being, unconscious bias in the workplace, visible and invisible disabilities, the power to interrupt difficult situations, and gender inclusive classrooms, strategies that build community, to name a few. So staff members are also given an opportunity to evaluate these workshops in which they participate in and provide feedback and recommendations for future sessions.
And finally, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is being a district that talks about self-care and wellness. Right now, we have our employee assistance program, which is EAP, which is, a program that we always, invite our staff members to take active involvement in, because not only do they help you with conversations about your mental health, they talk about finances, they help you with housing, they have so many other things that they offer in the EAP program. We also have affinity groups in our schools so that staff members can have a safe space, a safe community to join in and have conversations with. We last school year, we offered community of care baskets. We know that these are some very, very tough times. And we had individuals who had losses. We had individuals who were celebrating. And so we acknowledged each individual that we knew of with a community of care basket. We also provided opportunities for people to reach out and give us ideas on how we can help fund just activities in their buildings or in their departments so that they can help build community within their spaces. So let's say it was the special ed or SSO department. They may come and say, okay, I have this great idea that will help our department to become a cohesive department, to help our staff members feel more included and join together. And their idea was brought before a committee, and that committee decided, okay, yes, this is a great idea, let's fund it. Or they say, let's tweak it a little bit to make it more inclusive, and they shared the idea and funded the idea, and then we got pictures of just staff enjoying themselves and feeling seen and heard within their spaces. So that's a brief overview of what the HR department has done. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to see the numbers as to how we have evolved as far as, or how we have diversified our staff, all of that is listed on the DESI website. And tonight we just tried to answer many of the questions that we've been hearing from the community and from different people. Hopefully it worked. And while we're here, we are, ready and available for any questions you all may have. And with that, thank you for inviting us, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ben.
And thank you all for taking time out of your already busy schedules to talk to us tonight. It's much appreciated. Um, Anybody want to start off with questions here? Jumping right in. Irv, go ahead.
Yeah, love the presentation. A lot of really good information, especially background information. I do have some questions. First of all, I'm going to be transparent. I'm a hell of a data person, so data would be good for me, knowing what the past was, what the present is, and where the objectives are to go. Where were we? Where are we now? And that's all in terms of diversity, and where do we wish to go, and those objectives. That's one. The other thing is really interesting to a person like me is uh, your interview process. Uh, when I heard that your resumes were not shared with the interview committee, the question that came to me is, well, if resumes of a potential candidate are not shared with the interview committee, then what information does the interview committee have in order to make a decision as to a particular candidate? I mean, it's, so for me, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm talking to this person, I'm on this interview committee, this person appears before me, I have no resume on that person. So the question automatically is, well, what information do I have that I am going to be able to make a decision on this person, this one person versus another person, since I have no resume?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. That's two. Uh, the other thing is that what's really uh, that resonated with me is what is, when you say safe spaces, are those safe spaces for people because of their color, ethnicity, or whatever? And what is the criteria for a person to go to have in terms of when you describe a safe space? All right.
So I'll start with the last question first. So really quickly, safe spaces are spaces where you feel as though you are heard, you are seen, you are respected, and you belong. So that's what we look at as a safe space. And in those spaces, like many of the affinity groups, people come together and they feel like they belong, right? Then going to your first, well, your second question, which was about what information is shared. I'll tell you twofold, right? Because I know a lot of people, when we made the changes, a lot of people struggled with that. They're like, oh, these people are coming in and we don't know anything about them. So one thing they do know is that the screening committee has looked at the resumes and deemed this person in front of them able to sit and have this interview, like they are qualified and able to sit and have this interview. The other thing that happens too is that the person who is coming, right, to sit and interview, they're told that the people in front of you have never seen your resume before. So with that being said, please make sure you give them all the information they need to know about you so that they can make an informed decision. I know a lot of times people like to have a piece of paper in front of them and they compare the paper to what the person has said or is saying. And we're saying that person is in front of you. Put the paper away and have a conversation with the person that's in front of you. Ask them the questions. who are you? Why should you be the person that we move forward in our district? Why should we have you come and join us? So hopefully that helps serve.
Thank you. And we'll go Margaret and then Peter.
I just one comment. I would like to say I'm really excited to hear about the Amherst Futures program. I think if we can do that, it's a service to the community of the people in the school, the staff who are working in the school, and really benefits the school in the long run. So I was very pleased to hear about that. I have one question about the interview process because I did have the opportunity to serve on one interview committee. And we were given the questions to ask, which I can understand because you want to ask consistently the same questions to people, but it didn't seem like there was an opportunity to perhaps pursue another detail regarding someone's answer. So I don't know if you have a response for that, but just perhaps pass on that observation.
Well, I would say thank you for sharing that observation because typically we ask the committee at the end if they have any follow-up questions for the person in front of them. Mm-hmm.
And Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Doreen and the HR team. I really just want to take a step back and appreciate the body of work that Doreen has led over the last number of years. I'm fortunate that I started on the school committee about the same time that Doreen came on board, and so I feel like I've seen kind of like the evolution of things. And one thing I've always really appreciated about Ms. Cunningham's efforts have been that she takes the long view, and that we're not here to hit a number in 1 year. We're not here to do one program and get some attention or publicity for it. It's all part of a whole, and to see it expand the way it has, and to see it validated. I mean, those numbers of increase in diversity of staff over 5 years are amazing. I mean, there are so many districts across the state that put in a lot of time and effort that aren't able to achieve that. I just think it's really a testament to how you've taken it as a holistic view. It's not just about increasing the candidate pool. It's not just about retention. It's not just about the interview process. It's the whole all those things together. And the number of participants in the Pathways to Paris program is just another phenomenal aspect of that. So I really appreciate the work that you've done. It's validated in the quantitative numbers, but also in the qualitative response that we've heard from students and staff and the community over the years. I guess my one question is because you brought up the professional teacher status, I've always been interested in as we approach that 3-year mark for staff that have been here, and the district is about to make a pretty important judgment call, right, about granting the status, which provides a significant level of job security for staff. It's really kind of a pivot point, right, in terms of, do we think that this individual is going to be a good fit for the district in the long term? Is it going to work out? And maintaining high staff quality is obviously very important to an excellent school district like ours. And so I'm just wondering about, do we keep a real close eye on that? Do we have like a process for, okay, we're within a few months of the 3-year mark, we need to sort of take a step back and have a review and make a really kind of informed decision? I'm just curious about like the process around that.
Sure. I'll definitely tackle some of that question. And Doreen, if you want to jump in at any point, I invite you to. But absolutely. So well before the 3-year mark, we're looking at the individuals in their first 3 years of employment, right? To see if this is someone definitely that we want to have continue in the district, and support them so that they can continue their career with us here in Amherst. Or are there concerns? And those are very real conversations that happen. So well before it happens, well before months before the 3-year mark, right? Like it's the entire 3 years where we're really looking at an educator's trajectory, their first 3 years in our district. And then, once those 3 years end, we have to, we grant them that PTS. If they're with us and they've worked the full 3 years and they've been licensed, that's a really important piece that we have to really highlight is the educator has to be licensed in their subject area, with DESE licensure as of day one, from the first day that they started in that assignment for the full 3 consecutive years, in order to be granted that PTS. But that process starts well before even their last year, their third year in the district, excuse me, for exactly that reason, to really be able to make a determination that this is the right person for our district.
And I'll just jump in and add that in our first year, or in a teacher's first year with our district, they have the first year teachers mentoring program. In the second year, they have another program that they go through. And in the third year, we're still asking the administrators the question, or their building principal the question, how is this person doing? Is there any kind of supports that this person may need? So it should come as no surprise, really, if a person does not stay within our district for the third year. We're always asking, always looking to support as well.
Thank you.
All right. So seeing it's her first question, I'll go to Allison and then circle back to Irv.
Thanks. I don't really have any questions. I just want to express sort of my gratitude. Also, I think I would have said almost all the same things that Peter just said. I think I started on the committee in 2018, so like a year later, and have seen this trajectory. And I will say this presentation every year is one of my sort of highlights of my year on school committee, because it is such. The thing that stands out for me literally is, you know, as Peter called it, the long view, but I would say it's like the persistence and sort of the hard work that sort of doesn't get sort of the glory all the time, and probably has a lot of pain. And I'm always also love seeing the whole team. I mean, you are a small but mighty team that's tackling, you know, a plethora of small things that together add up to much greater than this, you know, the sum of the parts, right? And I think, you know, seeing that trajectory and recognizing, as you described early on, Doreen, you know, that some years we may not see a steady increase in year over every single year, but sticking to it, you know, evolving and innovating along the way, and tweaking and pivoting where needed, and sort of building learnings in to keep growing that that support on sort of the multifaceted way that you do. I think, you know, we're grateful and I think lucky to have this team of people working on this, and sort of seeing the results that you're able to produce for our students and our community. So thank you.
And Irv, go ahead.
Well, you know, this is like a public meeting, and your presentation in terms of all the data, the information, is really important. So that those growth factors that Allison talked about and Peter referred to are really good data points to be included in any presentation that goes before the public, because the public has a right to know, has there been any changes? What are those changes, positive or negative, and relationship to the growth of diversity, equity, and inclusion within our school district? So any report that I would want, I think that would go out would have to have that data in there, because then if you don't have that data in, and then it's really difficult for a person to measure what has occurred or not occurred. The other thing is that it's only on reason I'm coming back to this is because Doreen indicated that in doing the interview process, the reason that the interview committee doesn't have the resumes is that there's the expectation that there would be a robust discussion and inquiry of the candidate by the committee. However, I also understand that the interview committee is also given questions, and so the question in which to ask the candidate. So if you already have preferred questions that are given to the interview committee, how then is the interview committee able to have this kind of intimate discussion that you alluded to, Doreen?
Right. So at the end of the interviews, the committee is asked, do you have any follow-up questions for the candidate? So typically they ask actually, typically the interview committee is asked, do you have any follow-up questions? So if there's something the candidate may have said that the member of the committee wanted them to expand on, they can expand. Also, if they have a question, so sometimes let's say I'm sitting on a committee and I have a particular question for this particular candidate, I might ask the person who's taken the lead in doing the interviews, can I ask a question? And then I ask the question. If it's something I really need to know, I ask the question and then the candidate responds. If it's a question, and it's typically a question that's a follow-up question for the candidate. So that's part of how we're able to get the information that we're asking or looking for. And yes, we do have to have these prescribed questions so that everyone starts off with the same question. So it's not, oh, you're just asking this person this and that person that, and there's no consistency to it. We try to make sure that there's always consistency so that no one can come back and say, oh, they asked me this question because I'm X, Y, or Z, right? There are consistent questions that are asked, and then there are follow-up questions that are also asked from the committee, as well as there's questions that the candidate can then turn around and ask the committee. Mike, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just want to, in addition to what you said, which I agree with, I think the other thing is when I've been on interview committees, it also allows for an apples to apples comparison of responses. And if we're asking candidates substantially different questions, and we get to it, we may be responding more because one candidate had an opportunity to answer a question that another candidate didn't have the opportunity to answer. And so, when I'm on there and I'm scoring and doing that, I can say, okay, this is how they responded in terms of curriculum, because everybody got asked that same question, as opposed to Irv got one question, Craig got another, and the comparison gets, I think, less precise. So that's the way I'd phrase it. Sorry to jump in, Doreen. I just wanted to add that piece.
And Stephen?
Yeah, so I think it's exciting. Haven't done the UWW track myself, that it's super exciting that when we started this staff and para to licensure program, we had 3 people in the program, and I think I heard you say that there were 22 that have gone through it now. So that's super amazing. But my concern is that I think I've heard it mentioned a couple times that are we still hiring teachers and administrators that aren't licensed to start with? Isn't the pool big enough that we could go with licensed right away? Because we had that issue a few years ago where there was quite a few. And it just seems funny to me that that came back up again. Thank you.
I can answer part of that. And really, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education did this really wonderful thing that, well, what I consider to be wonderful, and I think helps eliminate a lot of the barriers for candidates, is called the emergency license. So there's different tracks now for educators to become legally employable, if you will, in a teacher role. So they either have the licensure, whether it's provisional, initial license or whatnot. They also have the waiver, which allows teachers to be employed in the district under DESE. And now they also have this other track called emergency license. So, and we keep track of all of them, right? We have a lot of conversation about who was hired under an emergency license or who was hired under a waiver, and how we can support them in becoming licensed educators with either their provisional or initial license. So right now, our educators who are in positions, all of our administrators are licensed and have an administrator license. And then our educators who are coming into the district are either hired under a waiver or an emergency license if they don't already have their DESE license. And what the emergency license does is it helps them if they are unable to meet all of the requirements of a provisional or an initial license, but they have some of them that DESE deems to be acceptable for employment, then they're granted their emergency license. And it's actually been extended now another year, so into the 23-24 school year, to allow certain educators to show their progress towards licensure. And it's also very important to know that any of our educators who come in on an emergency license or a waiver are given an interim contract. So they're not hired on a permanent status, because they're not yet licensed with a provisional or initial license, so that it's aware to the candidates, aware to the person coming into our district that the expectation is for them to be licensed and to hold that provisional or initial license. I hope that was helpful.
Sarah Bess?
So first, I just want to say thanks to the HR team for all of this work that you have done. It's so much, right? And it's a lot of the behind the scenes work that I think doesn't get seen as much. So thank you. And then I also had the pleasure of serving on a couple of hiring committees, and I was hoping I could give Irv a little peace of mind. The questions that you're asking are really nice and open-ended, so the candidate can really put themselves into their answers. So you are getting that good dialogue of getting to know the people you're interviewing. And when the individuals come to the interview committee, you have faith in your counterparts in the screening committee that whatever boxes need to be checked to know that someone is like qualified on paper to do the job that you're asking them to do, that they already meet all of those qualifications, and that's not something you as an interviewer have to worry about. They know that whatever is coming through that door has already ticked all those boxes, and you just are there making, trying to find the best fit for the position in the school that you are looking to create. So having been on the interview committee, I liked it. I thought it was a good way to do that.
So I haven't been on both sides of it, like relatively recently. I would say so initially, like upon hearing that they didn't have my resume, there was like an initial like, oh, okay moment. But then I realized like I hate putting it in these words, but like it was the best scenario for me to sell myself to these folks. And it was actually reassuring that they all kind of knew like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. Now let me tell you why. Like that's kind of how I viewed it. But the actual question that I have is in regard to your reverse searches. I'm trying to word this right. Have you ever found like an instance where you have like the perfect candidate, but they aren't necessarily sold on coming to our district? Yes, yeah, that nice. And how do you overcome that? Or are there times where people are just adamantly like, I've heard about Amherst, there's absolutely no way I'm coming to work for you folks? That's as nice as I can put it.
Yeah, and Doreen can talk to this too. Doreen does a lot of the outreach when it comes to trying to get people into Amherst. Of course, of course, we've been on those phone calls, and we're trying to, really highlight all the awesome stuff Amherst does and all the awesome things that Amherst offers, and our amazing students and our amazing staff. And we have some really incredible educators already in our district, in our professional development, and our administrators who really value their educators and their staff in their buildings, and value the knowledge that they bring. And so we've absolutely been on the receiving end of, I'm never going there, I'm not interested. And, a lot of times when I have to contact educators to kind of go through the onboarding process and, trying to get them an offer letter for them to sign. And because even if they may have even come in and say, okay, I'll interview, right? And then it comes to the point of, all right, so our next step is meeting with the superintendent and going through all of the different things that Amherst offers. It's really, you really are selling the district to them. And I know it's not a great term, but you really are telling them about, look, our district values what you have to bring to the table. We want to listen to your ideas. We want you to bring in what you have, and we really value it, and we think it's important. And our I really can speak for all of the building principals when they will sit and listen to you, and they'll take what you have to say, and it's important to them, and it matters to them that they have staff that feel heard and feel appreciated in their buildings. That's not just, that's not just me talking, that's the reality. And so it's, yes, it can be a challenge to try to get that in a phone conversation, get that across in a phone conversation, but really that's who we are, right? We really value our staff, and people who come to work with us, they're important to us, and their voice really matters. And I think that that is something that at least can come across about Amherst, right? Because only the H is silent in Amherst. So that is something that we try to also convey in a positive way. In a positive term is your voice is going to matter when you come here. You're just not another number. And so, yes, we've been, and then there are the times where people are like, I'm all set, I'm going to stay where I'm at. But we really try our best to really highlight all of the amazing things that Amherst has to offer, that our school districts have to offer.
And I'll just add, Ben, if that's okay, is that in the beginning years, yes, I had to do a whole lot of outreach, right? But now we have people who are here who are telling other people, come on over. Amherst is a great place to be. And I tell you, I know that we still have a ways to go with some of the things that we have to do in our district, but it's better. We've come so far. We're doing much better, right? And we acknowledge where we make mistakes and where we have to do better by everyone, right? So people look at that and they appreciate that we are this transparent, right? And they come and they are recommended by other people who work here, and they share their experiences. We don't sugarcoat. We say this is some of the things that you'll experience here, but it's still a great place to be. And I hear from people who are here that yes, there are things that we can work on and make better, and they enjoy being here because we are working on those things to make it better.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions or comments for our HR team? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and again for your time and for all the time that you guys put in throughout the course of the week. It's like a never-ending job. Thank you. And next, we will talk about school safety at Amherst Regional High School. Mike, did you want to intro that, or are we going straight to Talib?
I'll intro it, but thank you. So this topic was raised by school committee members to put on the agenda into the future, and I think particularly last year when students came back, there were some concerns that were pretty pronounced around safety at the high school. And I want to thank again Principal Sadiq for Talib, we'll go first name, for putting in many and continuing to work on school safety. We want to make sure that our schools are in a place where they not just are safe, but feel safe to our students, staff, faculty, and staff on a daily basis. And that's critically important. And we continue to refine things that we're doing and then try new things to promote that feeling of safety and security at our high school. I referenced earlier about the drill last week, and that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the approaches, both proactive and reactive, we have in place to make sure that we're making good on our commitment around safety and security at the high school. So with that, I'll turn it over to Talib, who give a kind of a brief oral update on some of the things we're working on, and then open it up for dialogue from the committee. But thank you for being here, Talib.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, similar to what Mike said, there's no one way to approach dealing with safety in the school. So we're trying to do a variety of things. As Mike did mention, the Alice drill with the APD was one of the many things. One of the things that has continued since the school's been in operation is teachers really trying to make meaningful connections with students. The data shows us that's the main thing. Having at least one adult in the school that someone feels connected to is the best way to prevent a lot of the issues we see. So teachers do a lot of things intentionally to connect with students, having check-in circles at the beginning of class, doing other mindfulness exercises. We also have a group of teachers that are involved in professional learning groups. You may have heard about the PLGs. They're working on varieties of ways to help students feel more engaged and connected and improve their school experience. The first initiative from the PLGs is going to start next Friday. It's from our advisory PLG. We're changing the advisory to a choice block. And the choices that students have on different activities that they can join were based on a survey given to students. And then we also ask teachers to sign up to run different choice blocks. Again, trying to help students feel empowered that this is their school. They have some say in how their days are being spent. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the first choice block really plays out next week. And we are doing other things to prevent the specific concerns that we've heard, students and adults in and outside of the building. We've been concerned about the bathrooms for a variety of reasons. I'll call it the bathroom culture, for lack of a better word. Unfortunately, last year and at the beginning of this year, there were a bunch of fights in the bathrooms. There were also students vaping and unfortunately doing other drugs and making other bad decisions in there. Last and fourth quarter of last year, we had grade level assemblies to really talk to the students and tighten up the rules, if you say, getting more strict on students' movement. And we were able to hire additional adults to be outside of the bathrooms to sign students in and out. We didn't have those same adults in the school at the beginning of this year. And then we found in the beginning of the year, there were some of those same problems, not to the extent that they were last year, but some of them continue. This year we do, you've heard, we do have vape detectors in some of the bathrooms, and we're still figuring out the best way. Right now, it's data collection to give us a sense of how many times students are vaping in the bathrooms where there are sensors. We do have home monitors who do their best to respond to those when the vape detectors go off, and also to try to usher students back into classrooms as best they can. The home monitors are doing a great job, and it is a super challenging job to day in and day out, having to deal with students who are choosing not to be in class for a lot of different reasons. And so we've given the home monitors have all received some de-escalation training, and we try to support them. We have one dean of students who does her best to try to support them as well. And as we've been sending, since the vape detectors, since we put them in, the one thing we have been doing is informing families more of when their students are in the bathroom, when we do find out that there's students in the bathrooms and when the vape detector has gone off. It hasn't necessarily, we haven't caught more students in the act, but we are able to respond and often see groups of students coming out, and we question those students, ask them what they're doing, and then also let their families know, because there's no one thing. We have to work with families and need their support in helping us to reinforce the message that, for a million and one different reasons, vaping is terrible for these students, and they can't go a day without vaping. Then in my non-professional opinion, I'm not a therapist, but it seems like they're addicted, and there's more than the school can do to help them kick the habit, but there are a lot of things we're trying to do. When we do catch students in the act, we do search their bag, ask them to empty their pockets, confiscate any paraphernalia we may find. There's often consequences like suspension, or we do offer an alternative to suspension. Eventually, we like to have a Saturday community service overseen by CREST that we refer students to. But right now, the community service that we're offering students to do is overseen by some of our custodians. And to try to, again, give students a chance to stay in school, but also to be held accountable for their bad decision. And as part of that, they also do sit through 3 sessions with our school adjustment counselors to help to start to get at some of the reasons why they've chosen to vape. Students that are fighting, we do have our RJ program that Aaron Buford is our RJ coordinator. He's been doing a great job still working with individuals and groups of students in classes when there's conflict either between student or student teacher. So that is also what we've been trying to implement as much as possible. And we will be having more adults in the hallways also starting in our second semester, which starts on the 23rd, during the plus block, those minutes at the end of the day. That's a time of the day we find there's more students in the hall, that our days are long. So some students are just walking the halls, but there are a handful of them who are grouping up, texting each other to meet up in the bathroom or in some hallways. So we'll have teachers who don't have a plus block on that day. Like on Monday, students go back to their A period for the A period plus block, Tuesday B period, Wednesday C period, and Thursday D period. So if teachers don't have a class, an A period class, then on Monday, those teachers will be at different spaces in the hall, asking students where their passes are, being near the bathrooms, hoping that will deter students from going in there and wanting to vape, because the teacher will be right outside of the door or close to it. And also teachers, the way they structure their classes, we've been asking them to limit the amount of passes they give to students, like one person out of the classroom at a time. which really helps to cut down on the number of students that are out there, and also to give structured breaks. So if a student knows that they're going to halfway through the class, they're going to need a break to use their phone and use the bathroom, we're hoping to be less likely to then get a pass to go to the bathroom during the middle of class or to use their phone during class. And I've also been meeting with the student leadership groups to get their insight on how their perspective on what's going on in the hallways and the bathrooms. And their perspective, again, these are a lot of students who we haven't found in the bathrooms vaping, who aren't spending an excessive amount of time in there, but they do have friends and, of course, classmates who are doing that. And part of those conversations is me encouraging them to connect more with their peers, especially the seniors and juniors, with the younger students, to help come up, again, trying to find ways to help students feel like their voice matters. They have a say in what goes on and influence over how we respond to some of the things that are happening in school that we're not all that happy with. So this is a lot of this stuff is ongoing, and also thinking about if it makes sense to do school-wide, not necessarily assemblies, but small group activities about the dangers of vaping and fentanyl and other things of that nature, to try to help to educate the students, but again, in small groups so they can dialogue. As I think that's a much better approach than having school-wide assemblies when they're just getting the messages thrown at them and they don't have a lot of chance to respond and to talk with whoever's delivering the message, which ideally would be some teachers and some of our counselors. Yeah, those are, and again, I think it was with the Alice drill, which is helpful. We have to face the fact that Amherst isn't immune to active shooter being in the school. There were several students and adults who were really anxious about the training who came to me beforehand. And I tried to explain to them that it was really more of a chance to go through what the protocols are and what the procedures will happen. The procedures are if something like that were to happen. And then since the drill has happened, it really, I haven't received any feedback, negative feedback on it raising people's anxiety, because it was a lot of dialogue more than a lot of action. There was no alarms going off, there were no sound effects, there weren't anyone pounding on any doors. The safety captains, who are myself, a lot of the counselors, students who carry the walkie-talkies throughout the school every day, we did check doors to see if they're open, and when they were open, stepped inside and found out what was going on and explained that in the drill we are supposed to keep closed. I did read some scenarios. One was there was a stranger who ran through the front of the hallway and they were heading down towards a gym. Try to give some context so people had a frame of reference. Okay, if this had happened, then what would we do? And there was another scenario about that. They heard gunshots outside of there, or popping noises that could be gunshots outside of their classroom. What would they do? Another one called for a lockdown. So it was a lot of conversations. There were a few teachers who did actually have students barricade the doors, but most teachers really talked through with their students what they would do. And then it started on Thursday during D period, and then went into the plus block, which on Thursdays is also D period, to give teachers a chance to identify students who may have been a little bit anxious, and to have some dialogue with the students. So it wasn't just all this information, anxiety, raising information and send them off. So again, the feedback that I've gotten has been mostly positive. Haven't been any extreme reports of students and other adults feeling even worse than they did about potential of that happening after the training than they did before it. That's most of what I have to say right now. Definitely open for questions.
I was going to jump in before we get started and just ask, or before we ask other folks. So based on, I guess, like this, the perception of safety in our schools last year, strictly as it pertains to altercations, whether they're in bathrooms or just on the campus in general. Can you give us a sense of what kind of change there has been, if there's been any change? Like, are we, I mean, it can be as simple as there were 10 fights at the end of last year. That's a random number. That's not actual data, versus one this year or something like that.
I don't have exact numbers, but there's definitely been a significantly less fights this year than there has been from last year. Many of the students who were involved in the fights last year were ninth and 10th graders, and now they've matured. Again, a lot of the work that the counselors and the RJ coordinator, our schools, student support specialists and teachers have been doing to connect with students, I think has paid off over the years. And also, a lot of communication with the families of the students who were involved in those fights. And there were dozens and dozens of students involved in these fights. There were maybe a dozen students overall who had been in multiple situations with the drama. Some of it as they've matured, their families are more engaged. We are communicating more directly. We know who those students are. So we started the year with more check-ins. They have more counseling services and more supports throughout the day. And those supports look different for different students as we got to know them better and start to find out what they need to help to feel more engaged and with the drama.
Thank you. Okay, Peter and then Earth.
Yeah, so thank you for all this information. It's a lot to absorb, but I really appreciate the level of detail, particularly on the vaping, which is something we've been talking about for a number of years on the committee, off and on. And I like that I get the sense, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that you're approaching this in the same kind of way that we just have heard from Doreen Cunningham about how she looks at diversity, staff diversity is it's the long haul, right? And that it's not going to be fixed overnight, and that you look at continuous improvement. And it's not like next month you're going to come and say, hey guys, vaping is solved, right? So this is something we're going to be dealing with as part of life. So I appreciate that aspect. The thing that has always concerned me about how we engage with helping students with vaping, and that's how I really look at it, is helping them with it, is what a high level of nicotine addiction that we're talking about. I think with a lot of older adults, maybe who have never vaped or have just toyed with it, I think there's a lack of understanding of how high the nicotine concentration is, and how vulnerable children of this age are to addiction, to this drug, and also how continuous, how it's still being marketed. I mean, it's illegal to market directly to underage kids, but it happens quasi legally and illegally on social media that students are on, and there's obviously a ton of social pressure as well. So I think it's a real hard thing for kids to resist. And then once you are addicted to it, it's really hard to say, I don't want to break a rule, and compare that to something that you really don't have self-control over. So I'm more interested in, how do we provide students and parents more information more consistently before they get addicted, right? Like every year, I think, and this is maybe a broader conversation, Dr. Morris, with elementary school. I think that starting in 5th grade, parents should have basic information about vaping, and every year they should get it, so that by the time you are in middle school or high school, you know what to look for, and you know that if a student does become addicted, you know where to refer them to. Because that's the other thing, is that these monitoring actions are good, and I support them, and I'm hoping they're having a positive effect. But the rubber really hits the road, and how do we then convert a student who we've discovered is vaping into somebody who gets the help they need and is able to recover from a really strong nicotine addiction? So I'm assuming when we talk to parents, we provide them that information, but um, I love what you brought up about talking to student groups. So if there are ways to get that kind of information out there, and then just start to just really do the drumbeat throughout the student and parent culture of what a serious problem it is. But there are ways that if we are working together, students, parents, school, that we can provide the resources so that these companies don't exploit our children, which is what vaping for underage kids really comes down to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, it's got to be a group effort. And I do think that earlier we start educating students and families about the dangers, the more successful we'll be in the long run.
Earth?
Talib, when I was listening to you, I was taken back to about 2 or 3 years ago. I was addressing a community group, who was dealing with crime in their neighborhood. And one of the things that I said to him, I said, if you think that a policeman on every corner is the answer to your issues of crime, then it would seem to me that you have lost contact with the social fabric of your community. And so when I hear that, hall monitors, teachers in the hallways, monitors and whatever remote monitors to pick up vaping in the bathrooms, etc., and the increase that would be necessary. I guess somehow in my mind, I'm thinking, what is the social fabric of the school that is being addressed? Because those things that you're talking about, vaping, kids not in the classrooms or in the hallways, etc., are only symptoms. They're symptoms of a problem. So the question is, well, if those are symptoms, I'm just asking myself rhetorically, if those are symptoms, and what is the problem? This is by no means a criticism of what you're doing or how you're responding to it, or all those things that are going on. Because believe me, when I listen to you, I think this guy, this principal of this school is taking all the kinds of actions that if I were in his position, I would be doing the same thing. Hands down, I would be doing the same thing, because those are the kinds of actions one would need to be employing. But it does not then answer the question. Thank you.
Right.
Can I jump in on that one? Just briefly. Yeah, no, I just want to, I think it's the right question to ask. And I think I just want to remind folks, because we probably don't say it enough, that we have a student body that is greatly affected by the events of the last 2 years and 10 months, right? And so the disconnection and disassociation that we're seeing is not an unique to Amherst, Shutesbury, Leverett, and Pelham situation. It's what we're seeing nationwide. And so, I think it's sort of an interesting moment in time. I think I agree with Talib that we've seen some maturing of students who are struggling a lot with that behavior. And some of that's based on the excellent work and structures that have been set up to build those relationships and to rebuild that community. Because, I said this a lot in the past couple of years, is that everyone's lived a different pandemic, right? It's not the same for everyone. And I think this particular generation of kids, particularly the kids at the beginning of high school, the pandemic hit as they were entering adolescence. And so, we talk a lot about academic regression, right? That's all over the news. But the reality is that's a really difficult time to have the social disconnection that occurred when we were in lockdown and those pieces. So I think a lot of the work that Talib started talking about in terms of changing advisory, and there's more there, and RJ, is really about how to rebuild that community. Because if that community is not rebuilt, then you're just constantly going problem to problem, issue to issue. And so I think you're right to highlight that there's larger forces at play, and that rebuilding that community and those relationships is incredibly critical to reducing, the challenges that we've faced or are facing. And, I'm sorry to jump in, Talib. I just wanted to kind of interject myself there. And, I had an experience recently, not in my work life, where just someone was reminding me of all the things that certain generations of people lost with where the pandemic hit them at a certain age. And I really do feel for these students. I mean, we experienced when we came back that the seniors, not that they were through their adolescence, but they weren't experienced the challenges at the same level as even siblings in the same family a couple years behind. So it's not even just like, even within the same home, they experienced things very differently. And so that manifested when we came back to go to school, and students didn't have that social learning opportunity that is middle school, and students that just never really had a middle school experience. And that's a really critical one to prepare students for high school, not just academically, but more generally and being connected to a community. So I'm being long-winded. I'll let Talib jump in, but I really appreciate the question and the comment, because it helps remind us of what is at the root of many of these challenges, and also what some of the interventions have to take into account. Talib, did you want to add to? I'm sorry, I know I spoke quite a bit, but
sorry.
And then,
well, one thing I did want to add is trying to, again, I'll go back to trying to empower students to talk specifically about some of the things that they're doing. The students are promoting and trying to get more of their peers to come out to their sporting events, to the musical and theater productions. We're about to have our second dance of the school year. We plan on having another community day for the whole school in the spring to try to do things to build community, try to have more fun activities, and give students, again, a voice and a chance to make suggestions about things they would like to see happening during their school day. I think the more that they feel like this is their school and they have a say, I'm hoping that that will also translate into them, you know, making better decisions, taking more pride, and feeling like more like it's a place that they belong.
No, Telly, I'm just want to interject here. I really, really believe that RJ should be a system-wide, school-wide thing that is a part of the fabric of the school, of the high school. I do not believe that it should be for special occasions where kids get in trouble. The system, the philosophy, the teachings of RJ are so powerful in terms of community building that if it were school wide and a part of the school culture, which it would become. I'm just putting in a plug for RJ because I think it's, given what you've said, what we have witnessed in terms of the losses that COVID has brought up on our children. I believe that those kinds of skills and community building that are missing, that those things have to be taught, and there are systems to do it. And I believe that RJ is one of them.
Right. It is a process to implement new systems, and we are in the process of implementing RJ school-wide. And it has begun with mainly the check-in circles and restorative circles. Whenever there's issues in classes, we try to resort to those things. And there are RJ classes to try to, again, I think it goes to empowering students and teaching them how to be teachers. So some of our students who are going through some of the RJ classes now that Mr. Buford teaches will eventually lead circles and do mediations and try to spread the RJ philosophies more wider and broadly in our schools. So it is a process that we're engaged in and committed to, but it's like so many things, it's going to take a little bit of time.
Thank you. Allison?
Yeah, I just want to express appreciation again. I think, one of the things that I'm hearing, I tried to take notes and it's chicken scratch scribbles here. But what I'm hearing, and I think you were just kind of restating it, Talib, is again, a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach. The short term, how do we manage things in the near term to keep our kids and our community safe, as well as how do we set up the systems, the processes, the cultures, the approaches that over time will build that culture and community so that we don't need to rely on those short-term fixes all the time. And I think, between, what sounds on the surface as maybe a little draconian, the vaping monitors, at the same time that you're also approaching things to hear, you've said repeatedly, giving students a voice, but it's also the teachers and the staff in your school, sort of bringing the whole community together to solve this and to identify and pilot different solutions to this. And so I really appreciate that sort of holistic school-wide approach and sort of effort that isn't sort of focusing on just the community building or just the draconian discipline types approaches, but sort of trying to find that right balance and strike that so that over time we see an increase in safety, but not just safety, but an increase in that feeling of belonging and strengthening of the community that has as a byproduct improved safety, but has so many other greater benefits for students and their their progress and their learning in our schools. So just wholehearted appreciation on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the professional learning groups that the teachers are a part of, I think, is great. Again, these are some of the ideas and thoughts that teachers had, how to increase the senior experience, how there's so much different in the advisory and plus block and best practices, best teaching practices in a block schedule, and there's a few others as well. So again, yeah, of course, the teachers are a huge part of the equation. And I think, as Peter, you mentioned earlier, it's the school, the family, and the students themselves all working together to try to make it as meaningful and safe and fun learning experience as possible with all the challenges that we're all facing every day.
Any more questions for Talib regarding Amherst Regional High School safety? No. All right, then. Thank you for all your time and everything that you do for our students. It's definitely not an easy task.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Take care.
Have a good one. Next, we will move to student cell phone rules. Mike, jump in.
This really came from a committee member, so I think maybe we would start with the committee member who raised it, sharing concerns, because this is a discussion tonight. It's not a decision-making part.
Is that person here?
I believe they are.
All right, Peter, take it away.
Okay, well, I didn't know you wanted me to cue this up, Dr. Morris, so I'll do my best. So as shortly and simply as I can make it, the impact of cell phones and the things that cell phones deliver on the attention and behavior of human beings is a serious problem in society. I think. Now we could argue about the degree to which it's a problem, but it's a serious problem. It's had a and for the developing mind, which is what we're doing in schools, it has a pretty significant impact. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because there are some districts that have seen such a problem with student attention being drawn away, not just in the middle of class, but all throughout the school day and when doing homework and whatnot. That they've gone to lengths of there are these things called pouches where you come to the high school in the morning and you give up your cell phone, you put it in a pouch for the day, and then you take it on the back. I'm not proposing that we do that tonight, but I did want to start the conversation because I feel like we all sort of hand wave in general when we think about cell phones. It's like, yes, it's addictive and you should get off social media, but it's part of life. We move on. I don't think as adults we fully appreciate the magnitude with that it's impacting student behavior, and also the pace and intensity of the resources that for-profit companies put into exploiting the neurochemical processes of adolescence. It's what social media is designed for, and as bad as it's been, in the history of social media so far, again, I don't want to belabor this point, but I feel like with the dawn of how artificial intelligence is really supercharging the algorithm, like when you're scrolling up TikTok, the next video there is the greatest software in the world, with the most resources ever put into the greatest minds, have all been hyper focused to pick the thing that is going to most keep your attention on that platform. And it's an arms race of attention with students that are just developing their ability to have self-control and self-capacity of their attention. And so it's like vaping. It's not their fault that their attention gets so slammed and affected by these things. And so we have this brief period, right? They have this brief environment in middle school and high school where it could be controlled. We could do some things to provide an environment in which they can grow and learn as individuals, perhaps with some level of separation from this influence. I think in the next 5 or 10 years is going to be one of the major things that educators are going to have to grapple with. And I just think that the sooner we talk about these things and that we ask teachers and that we ask principals about, and we start planning for, the better that our students are going to be. So I really just wanted to hear how committee members felt, how our principals felt, how Superintendent Morris felt, and that.
Anybody want to jump right in? Irv, go ahead.
Former educator, former teacher at the elementary and secondary, middle school level. That's me. All of you who've had kids and teenagers know what Peter is saying is the truth, especially in today's technology environment. For me, maybe not for others, in terms of a middle school or high school where learning is going on or should be going on. And when I think about all the issues surrounding having kids have cell phones available to them in school or not in school, my response to several parents have been that if I were a principal at a high school or middle school, that there definitely would be the carrier where kids deposited their phone when they entered the building and picked them up after school. And someone says, "What about the safety requirements? Parents want to get a hold of a kid, of their child." And I said, "Well, that's what the central office is for. That's why you have a central phone number. That's why you have a person who can answer the phone and take inquiries and then contact those particular kids." Having cell phones in schools offers the opportunity for a myriad of distractions in the classroom, and also for frictions that could take place outside of the classroom when they're in the hallways, etc. I see no benefit for a kid to come to school and have access to their telephone while they are in school. If there are some benefits there, someone needs to let me know what they are, because I see none.
Mike, do you want to jump in real quick? All right, so
I'll wait till the committee members. There's no rush on me.
I'll take Allison and then Sarah Bess.
Yeah, I think I'm heartened. It's kind of interesting to have this conversation on the same time that we just talked about safety at the high school, and I know this applies also to the middle school, not just to the high school. But I think the way I think about it is similar to how we're approaching the safety in general in the school, which is it has to be multi-pronged. And I also take to heart, and I sort of wish our student reps were here this evening, because I really remember them participating in this conversation when we first touched on it, and that has stayed with me, actually, because it one, it made a lot of sense to me, but to hear their voices and what they were saying was they weren't disagreeing that cell phones are an issue and that cell phones are a distraction. I think, as I recall, they agreed. And what they were asking for was support in learning how to approach it and how to manage it, because they're not going to have a hall monitor or a teacher or to take away their phone when they're adults, or when they're in if they go to college, or in their workplace, right? So I think that really sticks with me, and it seems consistent with how we're approaching other issues in the schools, right? Like we do the short term stating of what our principles are in terms of use of whether it's vaping or cell phones or other electronic devices, and providing sort of a pathway to support and have those conversations. I pulled up. I asked this before, that we talk about how big of an issue is it today in our schools, and I think that we'd heard, just without having discussion, that it hasn't been an issue. I pulled up our student handbook. This is the high school one, and there's a half a page on electronic devices that says all the things that we're talking about. and is actually very, very explicit. It's not saying just cell phones. It's including headphones and earbuds, and when you can use it, when you cannot use it, when and even down into the hallways, right? You can use it in between classes, but not if you're in the hallway during a class, right? So, in my mind, we're covering it and we're addressing it right now. And the question is, in my mind, more in terms of part of some of what you raised, Peter, is how are we talking about it from a just a usage perspective, right? We can't control or mandate or by policy or handbooks, whatever, how students are using it. It's their, and what they're doing. But I think, in terms of teaching not best practices, but talking to people about some of the hazards and some of the things, I think, in starting already in 7th grade. I just conscious of the fact that there's a quorum of an elementary school committee here, so I'm sort of hesitant to talk about what that might look like in an elementary school. But starting for the middle school and the high school, I do think talking about social media, attention span, because it's not just the social media, it's also the alerts and the notifications that are built into your phone, right? You could be on social media, you could be using all of these, but turning off learning how to compartmentalize that and not sort of be walking around like this all the time, and sort of not being able to sort of put that down for a set period of time. That I think is something I'd be open to. But I'm go back to sort of what the students had told us, and they were saying very seriously, don't give us pouches and make us confiscate our phones just from the get-go, but help us learn responsible use and sort of how to manage our attention span. And I think a lot of parents, myself included, might be interested in that kind of education as well.
Service.
So thinking about it as a school committee person, right? So our charge is policy rather than procedure, right? So I feel like some of the things that we're talking about, like pouches, are more on a procedural level, rather than an overarching policy level. So I'm having not that I don't agree that there are, a lot of too much. I mean, whatever. It's my own self too, right? Like I find myself using my phone more than I should, right? But I'm having a hard time translating some of these things into on a policy level where that aren't procedural. So I think when we're having these discussions and thinking about this, I just want to make sure we're, keeping where we are supposed to be.
I guess Mike and then Irv real quick.
Sure. I mean, I think if the committee is looking for a next step, it may be worth exploring, trying to understand from all stakeholders' points of view, how people are experiencing things, right? So I'd be interested to hear from families' point of view what they're seeing at home, what they're experiencing, what staff members are experiencing when with cell phones and devices, and how it's influencing their teaching and learning, as well as from students directly themselves. So, I think before any actions would be, in my opinion, be considered, it might be a next step to see if there's an existing one. Awesome, right? Because we don't need to reinvent things. If there's not, if there's committee members who want to take this on, but I think it'd be really important to understand what are the lived experiences of all stakeholders, so that we're informed, by both national research, but also what people are experiencing in our hallways, in our classrooms, in our homes. And then, that seems like the next step that if people are looking for one to maybe undertake. My 2 cents.
Irv, go ahead.
There are any number of schools in our region and also throughout the state and adjoining states who have cell phone policies. I myself walked the hallways of a inner city high school and talked with the principal, and there were no there was there was no doubt about it. There were no cell phones allowed in the classroom. None, just none. The and also a one prestigious private school, no cell phones on the person of a student in the classroom. None. It was just school-wide policy. Uh, and both of these were, obviously very, very successful institutions. And there was no degradation of learning in relationship to those students or of the academic or social environment because of those bans.
Talib, go ahead.
Yeah. Right now, I think to get from if we were moving in the direction of having pouches in schools or putting more restrictions on students' access to phones, I agree 100% with Mike. I think it has to be a community effort. We have to give students and their families and teachers, all the stakeholders, voice and talking about what the problems are, what the challenges are, why we're talking about this, and then what the best way to move forward is. There are educational uses for cell phones, and there's a whole lot of distraction that cell phones can cause. And if to continue to rebuild and strengthen the community that we have to have everybody feel like they have a say in it. If we try to tell students, okay, now this is what you're doing, you're turning your cell phone in as soon as you get to every class, it's gonna make it even harder. It's gonna create more problems than I think it's worth. I don't want to set the teachers up to have a constant battle. Teachers do have, Allison read some of our policies. Now we aren't as strict with it most of the time. That students know, I remind them and the teachers remind them that the phone is supposed to be off and away during class. That's different than putting in a pouch that they can't access regularly. That may not, having it in their bag is a lot different to students than having it in some pouch across the room or in a place where they can't reach it. That's the level of connection a lot of people have to their phones now. Most of the students are all right with that most of the time. We still do see some in the hallways with it during class time. So unfortunately, remind them there needs to be a way. It's not a big battle with the students telling them to put it away. I'm not trying to have those constant arguments with students. Again, trying to help them understand the reasons why we're asking the importance of them being able to focus on school and not be so connected and distracted by their phone would be one of the steps we need to take to really make a meaningful change and shift this.
Yep. I was going to say, I kind of like I think it's important to kind of emphasize the idea of teaching responsible cell phone usage, right? Because presumably these folks are going to go out into the world one day and they're going to work for somebody who's going to have expectations of how they use that cell phone, right? Some jobs you need to use your cell phone for consistently. Other jobs, or at other times, you might need to be more present in the moment or whatever. I think that's like a positive life lesson there, right? So that's just my 2 cents on that. Also, full disclosure, I've convinced my son to voluntarily forfeit his phone. I think that's the best way I can say it, at the beginning of the day. And then at the end of the day, he can grab it. But there's also days that we do the trial run where he can try to figure out how to navigate his day with his phone without his phone taking over his day. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I since we're talking about next steps, I personally, I wouldn't put this on as a priority for me as a next step. So we're not hearing sort of a major issue of cell phones that we need to explore sort of other policies. Like we're not hearing Talib or other administrators sort of ask us for help on that. And I feel like this is and I'm comfortable with the policy. It's on a policy, the procedure in the handbook that sort of describes that. And I think if that's working, I personally don't feel the need for us as a committee to take this up. I mean, maybe we want to translate the handbook into what might be a policy that sort of that handbook sort of fits within. That might, if the policy subcommittee wants to explore that, but I, I'm not hearing right now that it's an issue, and I'm not sure that I'm supportive of sort of looking at that next step. I will also say that, and I'm probably going to get kicked after this for bringing this up, but one of my kids experienced this when they were at middle school and had to have their Chromebook taken away from them and been, in class, right? But what I appreciated was watching sort of how that learning happened, right? So he knew why it was being confiscated from him. He knew that he had to give it up. And what that opened up was a conversation with him and his teachers at the middle school about why and what that meant and sort of what sort of would be appropriate use of his Chromebook during the class period time. And so as far as I know, there haven't been issues since then, in in the high school. But I do think the way we're approaching it and the way our teachers and staff in the schools right now is approaching it is supportive of our students learning how to use and how to interact with cell phones in an appropriate way. Um, and sort of allowing and sort of supporting the kids and sort of making good decisions on the use. And I do know that some teachers allow cell phone use in the class for specific purposes, and I think that's also helpful in sort of learning not just when not to use them, but when are good times to use them and for what purposes. um, so I just want to say, I mean, unless the majority of the committee wants to explore sort of things like more serious policies or approaches to regulate the use of electronic devices, I'm not sure that it's a priority for me.
Peter?
Yeah, so real quick, as quick as I can make it. I really appreciate the conversation. I like it when we can have conversations about topics and we're not all initially on the same page, but we're all coming from the same value place, right? Of like, we're here for the best interest of students. How do we support teachers in supporting our students? School committee supporting administration, supporting teachers, supporting students. And so I like the suggestion of Mike and Talb of let's reach out, let's connect with parents and with students, with staff. Let's find out what is the current lived experience. What are the pain points? What are problems, if any, that you're seeing? Where do you want help? I'm very cognizant. I very much appreciate the point that Talb brought up about I don't think just some heavy-handed you will do this for teachers is the way to go. I don't want to set them up for failure. For me, this is all about empowering the learning experience, and so creating the better resource for that. So yeah, so I do want to understand to what degree is this a fight at home? When does this and if it is, when does this begin at home? To what degree does it disrupt classes? How does it do that? What are some adjustments that could be made, maybe that the teachers might want, but they haven't had a chance to say it? I think those things are good. I'm also sensitive to the fact that of what Allison said before of we don't have any students in this conversation right now, and for good or ill, cell phones are a primary means of social connection for students, and for all the evils of social media, and there are many of them, it still is a way that that kids connect with each other, even in the middle of the school day. And as much as maybe I want to turn back the clock to the olden days where everyone's in the cafeteria and you actually have to like seek people out to be right next to them and talk to them. That's not the way it is today. So and particularly in this environment, this post-COVID environment and current COVID environment that Dr. Morris described, where these kids are still going through and trying to recover from the developmentally. I don't want to just rip something away from them that is something that is in some context positive for them. So I don't feel a need right now to like, let's do a formal policy exploration. But to whatever degree it's natural within, surveying or connecting with staff or parents, I would like to have some kind of direction towards, let's first just kind of do a general exploration, understand where people are at with this.
Craig and then Irv.
Thanks very much. I'll try and be brief just for the sake of time here. I've got to say I agree primarily with Allison on this. I don't feel a sense of urgency, although I do recognize the dangers or ills of cell phone addiction. Some people really do suffer from it. There's a real problem. My main thing the reason why I'm speaking right now, it's what Peter, you just said about reaching out to parents. I think we need to be very, very wary of conflating. We have enough issues, teachers have enough issues of what goes on in the home carrying into the school. I think if we're looking at this as a school committee, we should be concerned with what is happening in the school primarily. Not to say that may not at some point in the future involve what is happening at home, but once you open that door, I'm just concerned about how very complicated, because many families, everyone has a different perspective. I appreciated at the beginning of or during COVID when mask mandates were lifted, I remember Mike's email, the administration's email, that said, this is the policy in the school. Whatever your feelings are at home and what you want your child to do, you can express them to them, but we will not enforce what your family wants. We have a policy in the school, and that is what we are doing. I think that's an important perspective to take, is if we have a policy in the school, we pursue that. So if the administration feels like there's a time to talk to teachers and find out, do we have a problem in the classrooms? Just because we're not hearing it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going on. That would be interesting. But if we're not hearing it, maybe it is an indication that not much is happening. So I just wanted to say that I think we should, if there is any proceeding, we should stick with the school. And I'm not necessarily endorsing that now. I'd like to hear from Talib and Mike that, yeah, we're hearing a lot of teachers are concerned, the water cooler talk is, there's concern. So then perhaps a more formal discussion happens. And I'll cease there. Thanks.
Thank you. Irv?
Craig, that's great. I love what you just said. Love it a lot. It's right on. One of the things that I would like to leave you all with is check out your athletic teams in terms of what happens in their practice sessions, when they're in practice, either on the field or on the court, basketball, volleyball, track, etc. All of those things. Where are the cell phones? And what is the policy there?
I know the answer for my kids, but Talib, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for all the talk about this. So cell phones, they are a concern. It's not a major concern. There's a lot of other issues, vaping and some of the things that are I would much rather have us focus on than the cell phones. But it is a distraction throughout the day, and there are students making bad decisions with it. And I know as far as the family outreach piece, it would really be on how they would support whatever changes we make in school around the student cell phone use. I agree with you, Craig. I don't really want to know I'm not asking families how they're experiencing cell phones at home. I care, but I'm more concerned about how the families will support what we're doing in school around the cell phones. That's really the only question or information I'd be asking, or think my opinion should be asked of them. I just wanted to throw those two things out there real quick.
Thank you. And if there are no more comments or questions regarding cell phone usage, we can move on to the track and field project update. Track and field project update. I think Mike can set that up, and Doug probably has some input here.
Yep. I can share what was shared with the committee and myself over the weekend, on the date, maybe one day prior to the date that was set, based on the regional school committee vote last week. So give me a second to queue it up. And Doug, you're welcome to chat to it if you'd like as well. Is that big enough or legible? Hopefully. So in short, the boosters communicated with us on the fundraising front that that from the last time you met on Thursday, that they had 339,828 committed funds. That's not in kind, but just financial donations, and that's more than what they had when they were presenting it on Thursday afternoon. And consistent with your vote, they wanted to share where they were with their fundraising. They're still pursuing in-kind work, but that is the update that we received.
Do you have any questions or Bam? Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to say enormous, enormous thanks and gratitude to the boosters. This is an incredible level of donation to our public schools that represents many hours of volunteer work from our parents over a long period of time, and in a really incredible total over the course of essentially one calendar year. I mean, fairly unprecedented in terms of public school fundraising efforts, at least in my memory. I don't have records going back decades, but this is really extraordinary. And I'm really grateful, and that they met the goal. That we've hit the mark. That we can proceed with the reorientation of the track at 8 lanes in the synthetic turf field. And that as the boosters shared with us last time, that there's a lot more funds that they are continuing to pursue, very large in-kind donations that will have a major impact, and as well as the fundraising continues. And so I'm sure if the boosters were here, they would remind everyone that the fundraise we've hit a certain level that allows us to go forward with this option, but the fundraising continues, and so we want to make sure everybody knows that and keeps that up. And I'm really I know this isn't going to happen, implemented tomorrow. And so, I am, interested in, what are our next logistical steps, to move forward. But I'm just really excited at the prospect of this resource for our students in our community. And I just couldn't be more grateful for what the boosters have been able to do for us.
Talib, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Peter said and thank the boosters for the efforts they put in here, and also for all the other support they give to our student athletes. They really do a tremendous amount, from providing dinners for different sports teams and different events, and the support and getting the word out there. And as Herb said, encourage folks to come out and watch the sporting events. They do an amazing job, all volunteers. I greatly appreciate all they do, again, with not only the turf, but everything they've done for our student, continue to do for our student athletes.
Thank you. Doug.
I think there's a few questions regarding sort of the mechanics, talking about next logical steps regarding this funding and how we access it, use it, et cetera. I think those, I've had some preliminary conversations with my colleague at the town of Amherst, because of course Amherst has got a couple of blocks of money as well. We posited some ideas about how we sort of structure this and set this up. I don't think that we have any need to necessarily ask for this money at this moment in time, but we will at various points in time need to get that funding and be able to secure that funding. One of the things I will just say in general is about public schools is that we cannot commit to anything we don't have funding secured for. So if we get to a place further on down the line where we need a large block of money secured, meaning either through a debt authorization like we have, or just cash on hand by virtue of either appropriation from the various member communities or from donations such as those we see on screen here, we'll probably hold those in some sort of escrow type account, but we'll need to have those before we can commit to contracts with people and that sort of thing. So we can't take any action without the funds in hand, and so we will at various points be reaching out to those partners we have, not just here in the boosters group, but also others to secure the funds and have them prepared and ready to go when we need to engage in contracts and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Irv, go ahead.
Yes, Doug, and any other person who have the answer to this question. Um, when do we see starting this project with the funds that we have in hand? And are the funds we have in hand enough to complete this project as envisioned?
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
As far as complete the project as envisioned, no, we don't have enough funds in hand for that. We're part of the way there. We're not all the way there. But there are some open things. I have a couple of Community Preservation Act applications, not for large amounts of money, but in Leverett and Shutesbury, they're still open for them to make their choice about whether to fund that or whether they can fund it. I think there are some other asks that we'll make as well that could be part and parcel of funding. But I think there's a lot to be raised yet, and how quickly we'll start will really depend on the ability of myself and our facilities director, Mr. Roy Clark, to get together and start shaping the request for proposals for design services, which will be a piece of work that we start in the next week or two. I think we'll probably get going on that. How quickly we'll be able to put that together and go through the full procurement of those design services will be dependent on both our schedules and how quickly we can get the I's dotted and T's crossed. This is not a small project, so it has a fair amount of state procurement law that applies, and so we want to be careful with the project and do it properly and meet all the requirements of state law.
Margaret, go ahead.
Thanks. So you all know that I voted against the artificial turf option. But aside from that, I have a couple of questions. A couple of these questions are my own. A couple are things that people have asked me that I don't have the answers for. So the number that we've been talking about is $3.7 million. That's based on a 2021 cost that was given to us in the Weston and Sampson report. In that, they said the 4.7 million, which is required for the full project, we should estimate 4 to 6% increase every year for inflation. That's a pretty significant increase in cost. So I'm wondering where is that money going to come from? Another thing that they mention in that most recent proposal is that if the Tanbrook culvert needs any work done, this cost is not included in their proposal. So I'm wondering who would pay for that? Would that be the town of Amherst and the DPW? But this is regional school property. And you're talking about getting money from other sources. So I'm wondering, is this something that could potentially be added on to the assessment to the other 4 towns through the capital projects? Because in Pelham, we're kind of just getting by as it is and have met all the commitments that have been asked of us, but things only stretch so far. And I know there is concern. We have a roof project coming up also, as does the middle school. So the other questions that were asked, I don't know, what is the current timeline right now? And when will we be assured that all of the money is available and the project can move to construction? So those are questions I could not answer. So I don't know if anybody else can.
So I can jump in just very briefly. Is that I think the boosters indicated that they're continuing to work on donations as well as in-kind and financial donations. I think at this stage of any project, the cost is an estimate. We don't know what's going to happen. Things could go up, things could go down, and we're seeing that in kind of some other projects. So I think I definitely understand where you're coming from, Margaret, to say that. Can I tell you to a penny what the cost of this project will be? No, no one can tell you that. I think it's really going back to the threshold that was voted by this body last March to say what would be sufficient progress where we can start moving forward. And that threshold, according to the latest update, has been met. But things aren't going to the ground tomorrow. That's not the way these design pieces work, and we don't know what the future will hold with inflation, right? A year ago you couldn't have predicted this level of inflation. We don't know what next year will hold. Is it going to get worse? Is it going to actually get better? And things are going to reverse. We don't have that knowledge, but I think as Doug said, this gives us what we need to start taking next steps to try to ascertain that information and have directionality in the process, which is to move forward with the option that was voted by the regional school committee in March, and similar to what was voted based on what was voted last Thursday by this body as well. I'm not suggesting there wasn't dissenting voices, Margaret, and I'm not trying to suggest that doesn't exist, but any project at this stage we have an estimate for. The threshold the committee voted to move forward has been met. There's more fundraising that needs to be done, and we don't know the real cost, which would be true no matter if it wasn't during a time of inflation pressures or not. So that's sort of my summary in response to your questions. An exact timeline would be developed if we start getting designers on board to start working with us. I think until that time, none of us is an expert in building tracks or artificial turf or natural turf fields. So I think no one can give you the clarity I think that you're looking for. It's super reasonable questions. I'm not suggesting it's not, but sort of the next steps are engaging folks in the design process and getting more information along a lot of the dimensions of the excellent questions you asked.
So in response to the timeline, the person who asked me that, we are at the point where you would begin to engage consultants, is that, or design people? Is that where we are?
Yes, I'll answer that question. Sorry, to the chair, but yeah, basically yes. And I think, and I've said this in the meeting last Thursday. I think I've said it other times. It's likely, given the scale of the project and the fact that the fundraising is ongoing, we'll probably ask our designer to give us, for lack of a term, a bit of an a la carte, type of set of options, so that we can kind of see where our funding is. And because we could wait forever to get full funding for the most beautiful thing ever, but then again, we don't want to wait forever for this because we need to replace our track. So there's a balancing act there that we'll have to make a determination about, and in concert with the committee and the fundraisers, and so we'll probably have a little bit of an a la carte style design, so that we can sort of match that up with the funding levels that we have, and see if we can still bring this to fruition and in a way that's reasonable, and a time frame that's reasonable.
Okay. And do you anticipate, that this could potentially come back to the four towns, some of it, in terms of a capital assessment? Or you just don't have an answer today for that?
I don't think I have a good answer to that today. I mean, I think that we did receive feedback from the four towns when we proposed this level of debt authorization. So that was one piece of information. How it will play out over the ensuing months, I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I'll take Allison and then Peter.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see this when we get to future agenda planning. I think maybe at a next committee meeting, a more thorough update might be helpful, because as of Thursday, we didn't know which direction we would going to be going. So there's no way that Doug and Mike could have prepared sort of a detailed presentation to answer all of these questions, because I have it's like, oh, okay, we're good to go. Okay, now what is the timeline? What are all the like? There's a lot of questions, and I think, to be fair, we got the email on Sunday afternoon, and so there, it's not possible to have that kind of detailed update. So I think, as you sort of confirmed my recollection, Doug, which is when we voted in March, this timing for this decision point was because bids were going to be going out to go to designers, and needed to know what the specs were for that designer in terms of what we were asking them to design, and that it would be I can't even remember what the date was that we might have a new track at this point. But I think going through that, and I don't want you to answer that tonight, Doug, because it's the hour is late, and I think it would be more helpful to have an actual presentation, like an update. So here's just a recap of here's all the funding that we have today committed. Here's the next step, and I do think, you know, the estimates that we have are just estimates, and you know, if I compare it to a building project I'm familiar with right now, we have an estimate, then we go and do the detailed design and get a thorough estimate, and until we have that, we're not going to know. We have a range, and it's a very big range right now. So I think having that conversation will be helpful at sort of our next meeting, and sort of talking about what are those next steps. And I don't expect you to have all the answers right now, because we've literally, it's less than 36 hours since we learned that we had the food. And I will say, I sound grumpy, but I too am like, you know, really grateful, thankful, and excited that our boosters were able to pull this off. I know that even as we voted on this last March, I think we even had doubts and questions about whether it was possible, but they were confident that they would be able to get there, or at least be able to get us going. And we were like, if they're confident, then that's, you know, already, you know, a big part of the game. And I think so it's surprising in the sense, because we were doubting, and I think, you know, they've done a tremendous amount to support our students and to support our school community, and I'm grateful for that. So I'd like to see this come back in the future agenda.
Peter?
Yeah, I was, Allison said most of what I was going to point out. So yeah, that would be good to have when it's available. You know, I mean, in terms of, you know, what money do we have now, what remains, and, you know, like has been said, you know, the original goal, the reason why we set 3.7, right, is because 4.7 was the original estimate of the project, and so 3.7 was about 80%. Also happened to be you know, $1 million less, and so the idea was always that at this point we would, you know, the goal was to get 80% of the way there, and we're there. So, you know, we always knew that there was still going to be distance to cover between here and the rest of the funds, which is, you know, which is why I think it's important for us to communicate to the public. The fundraising is still ongoing. I think it's important for the regional committee to, you know, to talk about that and support that, and about what that means. And, you know, as the estimates come in, we will, you know, we'll get that information.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any input regarding the track and field update? Irv.
One thing for Doug and the people on the track committee, and those boosters who are toiling out there to raise this money. And it's really, really great that you've come this far. But I would caution that we need to manage expectations on a realistic basis, so that when we go forward, we can go forward with our eyes wide open as to from where we are right now and what it's going to take to get to where we need to go. And I remind each other, as all of us, as I reminded the budget subcommittee today, is that this is a construction project. And construction always has cost hazards in it. And we must be mindful of that.
Fair enough. And the only thing I would add to this discussion at all is that I'd be wary of looking at an overall price right now and trying to speak intelligently. There's not even a written scope of work yet, right? So I think we should realize that we are at step one, like zero, heading towards step one, actually, like maybe right about a 0.5. So is there anyone else that has any input on this discussion? All right, we'll move on. And I'd also like to thank everyone who was involved in the fundraising, the boosters. I'd also like to acknowledge that Dr. Slaughter here has done a considerable amount of running around and work towards some creative financing here. So that probably should be noted. So the next hot topic here, school committee meetings, virtual or in person. And should I take that one, Mike, or do you want to roll with it? It's pretty straightforward here, right?
Yeah, I can take it. I mean, if
Yeah.
you'd like.
Yeah,
So, this topic's come up. I do feel bad that one committee member's not here because I think that person wanted to weigh in. But there was some committees have started to go back in person. Some are staying remote. Like one of mine is in person, one of mine is remote, and then we have our group here tonight. It's really around making sure Amherst Media they've done a great job, and we're all set for our next Amherst School Committee meeting next week to be in person. So it is possible, but I think at the regional level, people live in different communities, and back a long time ago we used to rotate so that there was a meeting in Amherst, and then or sometimes multiple meetings in Amherst, but then we'd rotate through the hill towns because so many people like to watch these videos. Watch these meetings because they're so darn exciting, I guess. That's created a challenge because really we have a setting at the high school library which has the Amherst Media set up there, which is not necessarily transferable to Shutesbury, Leverett, or Pelham. So I want to be sensitive that because one committee wants to do it doesn't mean another committee has to do it. It really doesn't matter to me personally. I think there are some times like tonight would have been a nice one to stay virtual because we had a number of staff members who don't all live super locally. Would have been more cumbersome to present. There are other meetings where, if it's just me, it doesn't really matter to me. But I just want to put it out there. I'm happy and staff are happy to, figure out whatever it is the committee wants. But I also just want to be sensitive that not everyone lives equidistant to the high school library. And I've heard that from folks. In my only 2 cents something that I would advocate against is doing a hybrid meeting. And by hybrid, I mean, we're all in the same space, but all have laptops and we're doing what we're doing here. We just have the option of being physically in the same space. I think the benefit for me of being an in-person meeting is I get to look at people and I'm not looking at a screen, and there really is value to that. But I love you all. Being in the same space while looking at a screen while you're 4 feet away from me, to me doesn't add quite the value that either the convenience of doing what we're doing now or the benefit of being in person. So my only advocacy really is against hybrid meetings, but I'm sort of flexible on either end of the other part of that continuum. And I'll stop talking now, but really whatever folks want to do, I'll roll with.
And real quick, I just want to jump in and point out that so my opinion is useless here because I can present a cogent argument either way. So I kind of really want to hear what everyone else has to say. Margaret, go ahead.
Personally, I could go either way. But Mike, you saying, the fact that if people need to come as guests to our meeting to present, if they're not local, that does create a problem. I hadn't thought of that. The other thing, I guess, that might sway me towards staying virtual is the fact that I think perhaps more people are in our meetings virtually than we would usually get at in-person meetings. I think it's easier for some people to join the meeting virtually than it would be for them to come in person to the meeting. So.
Thank you for that. Allison, and then Irv, and then Peter.
I think the comment about guests attending. I recall in past pre-COVID times that we didn't always have guests present in person. So I think the challenge is, having being able to see their face if we have them come in, because I think in past times sometimes they would call in and we'd have them on the phone, and is there a easy technical way to have their face visible? But regardless, I think in pre-COVID times we didn't require guests to attend in person. It's nice if they can, but for me, it's something to think about, is how to make it easy for guests if we do return to in person now. I, being on a committee that has returned in person, we've had one meeting, but we as a regional committee also met for our retreat in person. And I think, for me, it's a very different, we have some heavy business to deal with and to talk through and work together. And I find that when we're sitting, looking at each other and having those conversations, it's a different kind of conversation. I think when we can interact with each other in person versus staring at a screen alone in our bedrooms or living rooms or kitchens. So I would be in favor. And to Ben's point, I could talk out of the other side of my mouth too, because I could also say I really do appreciate the convenience a lot of times of being able to just dial in at home and grab my food and bring it upstairs. So there's definite benefits, and yet we're here to do work and deliberate for our school district and our school community. And so for me, that takes a higher priority to whether my own, if I can make it. So I think for me, I would really appreciate being able to meet in person and have conversations together, with each other, facing each other, as opposed to looking at pictures of ourselves on the screen.
Earth.
I mean, like everyone, I could argue on both sides of this. I see multi-billion-dollar corporations who are never going to come back in person again. I look at my daughter's team that she's on, and they're in 5, 6, 7 different states. And there's no data that indicates the decrease in effectiveness. Uh, I, I think that there are a lot of good things about being in person. Uh, I'm not sure if I could put a measurement on whether you're more productive in person than you would be if you're not in person. I don't know what kind of data there would be on that. For me, I would rather stay remote at this point in time, and that's something that I would go with at this point in time. That does not mean that in the future I would not think that being in person would be valuable. And there are some valuable things about it. But all in all, I can't, when I think about it and I think about the past, my past presence on this committee, we've been 99%, actually, if not 100%, remote. And I do not look at that. I look at that and I say, well, has there been any decrease in our effectiveness? Have our decisions been any less impactful? Has there been any negative results of us being remote? I haven't heard people talk about how any negative facets of us being remote versus being in person. So if there are a lot of people, if there are people on the committee who say, oh, here are the negatives, and those negatives greatly outweigh the positives, then we need to vote that way.
Peter, go ahead.
So the convenience isn't debatable. It's more convenient to meet online, and I certainly will cop to appreciating that I can walk down to my basement and have a school committee meeting, and then walk upstairs, and the total commute time is 30 seconds. There's no doubt that it's more convenient for guests and for the public and for members to attend the meetings. But then I come back to, we're under an extended state emergency authorization to be doing what we're doing. Outside of emergency authorization, we are bound by law to meet in person. And so for me, the principle is, do we have a justification that there's an emergency that should prevent us from going back in person? The vast majority, I don't have an actual stat, but every single other school committee I've talked to has been in person for a long time, outside of us, and I believe outside of ours. We've been fully remote this committee for almost 3 years. That's positive or negative. That's going to impact our dynamic. It's going to impact how we do business and the quality of our decision making and our engagement. And when I think about, are we really under emergency conditions anymore? I don't mean at all to belittle the seriousness of COVID and surges during the winter and all of that. But our staff and students have been back in person and without a mask mandate for a very long time now. And so what's different about us? If the guests travel from a very long distance when we really need somebody to present is really that much of an issue, we can show a Zoom link on the screen, for that isolated purpose. I don't think that's a deal breaker. And we've seen some other ability to provide public comment that has come in just through the advent of COVID with the voicemails and with the texts that we're just now getting going. And, there's other ways for the public to get in touch with us. Finally, the real driving reason for me is the quality of the in-person engagement and the conversation. Like, we don't know what we're missing by not meeting in person. And I just compare what we've lost, and I think that pound for pound, the capacity for back and forth conversation that isn't so, pun intended, two-dimensional, is a real thing. And I worry about that because I feel like the main reason that we meet is to do the work of the committee. Yes, we do it in public. These are public meetings, but it's to do the work of the committee, which fundamentally is discussion, conversation, decision. And I feel like the quality of that is better in person. And so, as much as I don't want to give up the super convenience of just being able to roll down to the office, I feel like it's time. I feel like we've really stretched it as long as we should. And if we go in person and we suddenly find that the public is in an uproar, that they can't access the Zoom meetings, and we find that we're having all sorts of problems, we can always switch back. But like, I can't see a compelling reason not to, at least, for a couple of months, just see if we can go back to what we normally used to do.
All right. Anyone else want to weigh in here? Oh, Sarah Bess.
I think I mean, yes, coming in here with my fun background is super convenient. But I agree. I think there's something that's lost when you're not in a room with someone, having important discussions like we do. So I would be inclined to go back in person, whenever that's when we're ready. Next time, however long that takes. But I think back in person would be the way I would lean.
Fair enough. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to chime in? Seeing some head shakes there. So next steps, I guess, would be we would put it on an agenda and vote at some point, perhaps. Is that... There we go, Peter.
I mean, we're on the agenda item right now. Personally, I'm happy just taking a straw poll. I mean, if people aren't cool with that, just raising their hand, seeing if there's consensus to do one thing or the other. If people want to discuss it and vote it, we can do that as well. But that's just my opinion.
Fair enough. In that case, is anyone chomping at the bit for a motion? Peter?
I move that we return to in-person meetings at the next practically reasonable opportunity.
Moved by Peter. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Right. And is there discussion? Like we had some. Sarah Bess, go ahead.
I just have, so what does that mean?
Peter?
Thanks, Peter.
I'm just trying to give some wiggle room to meeting planners in case like our next posted meeting for some reason, I don't know, the Amherst media cable blows up or we run into some logistical issue where it's really a bend over backward strain to get together. I don't want to like make people feel like they have to like kill themselves to do it, but you know, if it's achievable, then that's what that's what I mean.
Possible, yeah. Mike, go ahead.
So I'm obviously not a voter in here, but I also haven't heard much from Steve and Craig. And so I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, which is for me as a non-voter in this one, I would value hearing from folks who we talked about convenience, but perhaps are most inconvenienced. If they have, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Craig or Steve, but I also, if it's going to affect participation in meetings, I think that's a valuable point because I represent, as we all do, all 4 towns, and right. So I get grumpy emails, not only weather related, sometimes from folks in the hill town saying it's very Amherst centric, and because of the limitations of video, I don't think the committee is interested, particularly, or has not been interested in the past at rotating sites, which sometimes makes things. In the past, it made it more fair, but less access for video. So I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to goad you into the conversation, but I also I care about you guys and want to make sure that you have full access to share your piece before people vote. So I guess I am goading you a little bit. I apologize for that, but I think it's really important and valuable to me.
So no pressure, but the spotlight is on you, Craig.
Thanks very much. So yeah, and like everyone here, I really appreciate the convenience of the video. And as Peter said earlier, the emergency order, it'll eventually be rescinded or it'll expire, and we won't be able to do this. And I frankly was surprised. It was set to expire a few months ago, then it got renewed. I mean, that's been what's been going on. It was part of the reason why in Leverett I volunteered to do this. Part of the reason. There are other parts of the reason as well, but I was like, well, if I can do this from home, makes it a lot easier. Now that I'm part of this committee, I agree with everything that's been said. We probably should be meeting in person. I was planning on abstaining on the vote to further, make things exciting. But that's where I fall. I mean, I think I would follow the will of the committee. I think in the future Leverett representatives will be attending meetings in person because it's inevitable. It is bound to happen, is the way I see it. So we're on borrowed time. If that borrowed time ends now, so be it. But yeah, the convenience is great. Whether I can't speak to how the dynamic would work otherwise because we don't know what we don't know.
You're muted, Ben.
It's weird that you can't hear me when I'm muted. I was gonna say before I jump to Irv, Stephen, did you want to chime in? No pressure, but
Yeah,
also...
no pressure. Yeah, I mean it's only a 24-minute ride from my house to the high school, so but at least it's all downhill on the way there, so it's not on the way home. But my big concern if we meet in person is that some of you won't have nameplates because we haven't met for so long that there's been turnover, and you won't get to have your official nameplate in front of you when we sit at a table. But no, I'm all good with coming back down the hill again. It gives me a chance to buy a piece of pizza or something, because otherwise I don't get off the hill until the weekends.
Fair enough. And we also don't get to see the hats on the Zoom meetings. So, Irv, fire away.
For me, I'm definitely won't be able to attend in person. The plan was to be able to be in person after the mandate was lifted by our governor or legislator. So if you go in person, I certainly won't be able to start making meetings until after April 15th.
Allison?
Um, I think you know, even after this emergency authorization for remote meetings is lifted, so in pre-pandemic, individual members could participate remotely. It wasn't a requirement that either you're there in person or you can't participate. And we had on multiple occasions, one or even two people calling in to school committee meetings. So I think you know, again, the issue is the you know, the connectivity, but I think it's still possible for I mean, even if we didn't have the ability to meet remote right now, even when that's we're back to requirement for in-person meetings, individual school committee members can still participate remotely, but not in a it's not a hybrid meeting. I think that's the piece that in the past it was just a phone that we used.
And Peter, I saw your hand go up and then go down. We're all set. All right. Is there any further discussion? Okay, not seeing any burning interest in further discussion. I will take a roll call vote. We'll start Margaret.
Oh, God, I'm tempted to abstain like Craig was going to do because I have feelings both ways. I'm going to abstain.
Irv.
Abstain.
Peter.
Yes.
Craig.
I'm going to stick with my abstention. Thanks.
Allison.
Allison, yes.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Beth, yes.
Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
And me, I guess I'm the last one, right? Comes down to me. So me, yes. Ben, yes. There we go. So passes with 5 yeses and 3 abstentions with 1 absence.
Just out of curiosity, could the chair have just made the decision himself? I was wondering.
Could I have?
Sorry, Ben. I thought I asked that earlier. I did.
Realistically, I don't think before this discussion I could have. Like logistically, I guess I could have, but all right. So we will move on to policies and Allison.
Yeah, I move that we extend our meeting beyond the 2.5 hours by 30 minutes.
Totally forgot about that. I'll second that. We'll take a quick roll call vote. Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
Irv.
No.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Craig.
Craig, aye.
Allison.
Allison, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Beth, aye.
Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
And Ben, aye. 7 to 1. So now we will go on to policies. I'll put that to Peter.
All right, everybody ready for your 920 policy review? Okay, let's get all excited. I will try and make this as efficient as I can. Starting with the first one, JP. I don't know if you or Mike want to be screen sharing, or I can just talk through these.
I mean, you have the ability to screen share if you'd like to, Peter. If it's easier to screen share while you talk through it, you should be able to do that.
It's not, because I've tried that at policy subcommittee meetings and I always mess it up. So.
Oh, okay, sure. I just thought it was a technical like thing.
I mean, I don't mean to put the
I
administrative
wasn't
burden
trying
on
to call
you.
you out. I promise.
Okay, that's right.
Doug, since
I've
you have
done it
multiple
successfully sometimes.
screens, do you mind screen sharing the policy piece, or is that not in front of you from the board docs? All right, we'll give Doug a.
Okay, I'll start talking through it. So JP, student gifts and solicitations. So there's not actually a link to our current policy there, but if you go to policies and look up JP, so this is a last reviewed in 1986. So this is part of our policy review effort, and it's very short. Uh, so I'll just read it in entirety. So because of the embarrassment that might result from children, students will be discouraged from giving gifts to classroom teachers and other school personnel. For the same reason, there will be no formal exchange of gifts between students in the classroom. Solicitation of funds for charitable purposes from students in the school system will be made as approved by the superintendent. And then something about organizations desiring to distribute flyers have to get approval from the superintendent. So this is basically like gift restriction. And when we saw this, it was pretty odd, surprised that we had this policy. And so we essentially asked Deb to check with administrators and Mike if is this a problem? Like, do we need a policy? Is this a and there isn't uh, uh, um, a corresponding MASC policy that talks about student gifts. There's about like staff gifts, but that's just all Mass General Law. And so policy subcommittee felt like this is not a policy that we need. It's not a problem, and there are a number of positive things that happen with different cultures with gift giving, and teachers are very much able to manage that. So the policy subcommittee recommendation is to remove the policy.
Margaret, go ahead.
I move that we remove policy JP, student gifts and solicitations.
Second.
Moved by Margaret, seconded by Allison. And we'll take a roll call vote. We'll go Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bass, aye.
Allison.
Allison, aye.
Craig.
Craig, aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
And Ben, aye. Passes unanimously. And
Okay, next up is ACEA, which is service animals. So this is a first read because it's a major update. So if you click on the revised version, it will give you the marked up version, I believe. Well, it's not marked up. It's all right. I'm sorry. I thought this was the marked up PDF. This was an old version that we had our special ed attorney review. This is the updated version is very close to the language of the MASC policy. And so this is about use of the service animals, which is usually a dog, but can also be believe, if I recall this. I'm sorry, we reviewed this like 2 or 3 months ago. So
A miniature horse.
yes, miniature horse. Yes,
miniature horse. It's
yes,
amazing.
which is it makes you smile. But apparently, in the service animal community, they can be very valuable. They're harder to train and take care of, but they live a lot longer, and they're very strong as well. For certain situations with mobility needs. So it's really interesting. We learned a lot about support. But basically, this is an update of a very old policy and the updates are based on the education recommendations by our special ed attorney. And it's a first read, so we don't have to vote tonight. And policy subcommittee is meeting in a couple weeks. We haven't set our agenda yet, so if after the meeting you look at the revisions and you have any comments or questions, just reach out to me and we can discuss them at our next policy subcommittee meeting.
Alice?
I'm just curious. Looking at sort of what are the prohibited animals. Does the policy, how is it addressed if a student in the classroom with a student with a service animal, if they have a severe allergy? Does the policy address sort of how that's managed, or is there some separate policy for that?
I don't believe it's addressed. It's a good question.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is where, when we have competing disabilities, things get very uncomfortable. In general, my understanding is that if there's a disability and an IEP, and a support animal is needed, it trumps other kind of aspects. But I think there's some real world implications of what you would do in that actual scenario. Because if a student has a significant allergy and can't be in the same space as the animal, sort of someone has to move. And so in general, fortunately haven't had this come up, but the guidance we've received is try to work things out amicably beforehand. If this is going to be a scenario, right? I mean, it's possible that this IEP could be new, but otherwise think about that when you're doing class placements and things like that, to try to avoid conflicts from emerging. But it's a very practical concern of our administrators. But the legal guidance is that concern is not a reason to deny a student whose IEP indicates a service animal from having that with them in the class, and that may impact others, but that's the priority legally. So that's where we are.
So it's actually I've made a mistake. So it is referenced in this update on a couple of, if you scroll up in a section before this, a bit more to the animals and student health section. Almost there. Yep, animals and student health. So animals may cause an allergic reaction and otherwise impair health. No animals may be brought to school that may negatively impact the health of a student in that area. And then but it's exactly what Mike described. They're accepted from the provision to the extent described below.
This first read. Craig, go ahead. Sorry, I thought I saw that there.
I mean, in the original from 1986, I guess. No, 2014. It looks like it was adopted. Anyway, in the original, it does say things like all service animals must be kept clean and groomed to avoid shedding and dander. That clearly, if there were a conflict, the one as Mike described, could be just tinder for a fire. So, of what does it mean to be clean? So I appreciate, now that I'm thinking about it, I appreciate that that's been taken out, because it does seem to complicate things. So I guess we just hope that type of conflict doesn't happen.
Yeah, in our review, we reviewed it and then didn't see any need to deviate from the special ed attorney's recommendation, but it covers a lot of ground, so definitely worth a first and second read.
Do we have any other questions or opinions?
All right, next one is JJ, extracurricular and co-curricular activities. This is a very minor update. So if you click on that revised link, it will, okay, so this is one that Deb highlighted, the changes. This is another in our review of old policies. This seemed pretty good, except for just a couple of wording changes, changing wholesome to positive. And that really was the only edit. the rest of this seemed fairly copacetic.
All right. Margaret, go ahead.
I move that we approve as amended policy JJ extracurricular and co-curricular activities.
Second.
Moved by Margaret, seconded by Sarah Bess. Further discussion? All right, roll call vote. I will start with Stephen.
Sullivan, I.
Oh. Craig.
Craig, I.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, I.
Margaret.
Margaret, I.
Peter.
Peter, I.
Allison.
Allison, I.
And Ben, I. Passes unanimously. On to the next.
I was so excited. I was done for the night. All right. So the last one is CBI. So this is a major update. So this is first read. We don't have to vote tonight on superintendent of schools evaluation. Another one in our list of reviewing policies that haven't been reviewed in 30 plus years. So the language from the current one really predates ed reform and has some fairly limited language and about how one of the goals is. I mean, we do like improved relationships with the superintendent, no doubt. But that's not always like the primary goal, right? So, but the major revision is we took the structure of the MASC policy and then also referenced the DESI rubric, which is what we are based the goals on. So now it articulates that we follow the regulations from DESI. You know, these are sort of the very high level general goals that are talked about in the MASC of goal values that are talked about in the MASC policy, and then talked about how we develop goals and assess performance based on those goals. So, if anybody has any input, feel free to send after the meeting if you want to read in more depth afterwards.
Perfect. Then, if nobody else has anything burning to add to that, we can move on to future agenda planning. Peter, go ahead.
Two items that I think are fairly straightforward. One is two policy items. JFABB, which is admission of exchange students. We're gonna policy subcommittee is recommending removing that policy, and then IHBG, B as in boy, home education of students, recommending an update to that policy.
All right. And so far, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say we have budget initial presentation, long-term capital plan, as well as, probably should say FY24 and long-term capital plan. Second quarter budget, bathrooms at ARMS. We may want to hold on that based on how another committee discusses something next week. Vote on the school calendar, which was tonight, and we punted it. And being it's 9:34, that was probably a good decision. And the policy pieces that Peter just mentioned. That's what we have currently.
Is there anything anyone was? Oh, Allison.
Yeah, can that meeting is on the 31st, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. It sounds like a pretty full agenda, but I don't want to lose track of getting that sort of just a update on the track and field project that sort of covers like
just not just for us, but for the community. Here's what we raised. Here's the projected timeline. Maybe that could just be folded into the long-term capital plan, because that is a major capital project. But I'm not talking about a major discussion. I'm just saying, like, let's just have that information, because we didn't have that tonight.
Yeah. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed in principle. I'm not sure that we could prevent that from being a lengthy conversation, just because people may have lots of questions and comments and concerns. And if it's on the agenda, I think it's fair for people to ask them respectfully. So I'm fine. I probably would boot something else off, because this is not going to be an easy initial budget presentation either, right? Those of you at the Town meeting know that there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, as well as capital. So I'm not at all suggesting we shouldn't do that, Allison. I think maybe if it's a priority, it's a priority. I might just respectfully look at some of the other items, like some of the policy pieces and others, and see if there's flexibility from the policy subcommittee of perhaps waiting to the February meeting to get to some of those aspects. I don't have a preference. I know that we may not want to have like a 3.5-hour meeting.
Right. Allison?
Well,
Oh,
I
sorry.
was just going to say,
Margaret?
unless somebody says it could be, I was suggesting or thinking that it might be too much for the next meeting, and so push that to the track update to the next one.
Yes, I totally agree, because Doug is right in the middle of all of his budget stuff, and this is perhaps going to require some more work on his part. And I think it could even wait a couple of meetings if we had to. It's not urgent.
All right. Any other input on future agenda planning? And if something comes to you later on, you can email me or Mike. That's fine. That works. All right. So moving on to warrant report. I don't see any warrant attached here. Is that accurate? Moving on to guests. Is there Allison? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think Irv is gone anyway. So.
Yep. Sarah Beth.
Can I make a request that when we organize our next meeting, that the warrants be up earlier in the meeting, so we can make sure they get taken care of before they don't get taken care of?
That is a solid suggestion. I think we can acquiesce.
Thank you.
And then on to gifts. Is there anybody who wants to go ahead and read this one? Fair. Sarah Beth?
I'll read it. All right. So I move that we accept the gifts from an anonymous donor of a Matrix recumbent bike and mat for ARHS workout room purchased July of 2020 and will need transportation. The estimated value of $2,500.
Second.
Moved by Sarah Beth, seconded by Margaret. Let's go with a roll call vote. Sarah Beth?
Sarah Beth, aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
And Ben, aye. It is unanimous. And oh no, can I read that? Oh, here it is. All right. I move that the regional school committee will now consider entering into executive session in accordance with open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA and APAA if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, and to approve minutes in accordance with Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22, with no intention of returning to open session. Is there a
Second.
Moved by me, seconded by Peter. Craig?
Aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, I.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Beth, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Allison?
Allison, I.
And Ben, I. And we are drifting into executive session.